Project 2025 900-page Mandate for Leadership, Part 11. Adrian Mays, AI Genius, President of CCC Because We Care Foundation, bringing to you live from We're in the Hole. This is where the magic happens. So, I wanted to actually, before jumping into reading the Project 2025, picking up where we left off, chapter 13, I wanted to show you, as the captain of the Detroit ChatGPT revolution, I want to show you what you can do. Like, if you really didn't understand why the Project 2025 is important for you even to read in the first place. So, what I did is type into ChatGPT 10 reasons why everyone trying to build wealth in 2024 should read Project 2025. And here's what it came out. Number one, future proof strategies. Project 2025 offers forward thinking strategies that can help you anticipate and adapt to future economic trends, ensuring your wealth building efforts remain relevant and effective. Number two, comprehensive insights. The document provides a detailed analysis of economic, political, and social factors that will impact wealth creation, offering a holistic view that can inform your decisions. Number three, leadership principles. Understanding the principles of effective leadership outlined in Project 2025 can enhance your ability to lead in your business and personal ventures, driving better results. Number four, policy influence. Gain insights into upcoming policies and regulations that could affect your financial plans, allowing you to stay ahead of the curve and make informed decisions. Number five, innovation focus. The mandate emphasizes innovation and technological advancements, providing ideas and inspiration for leveraging new technologies in your wealth building strategies. Number six, risk management. Learn about potential risks and challenges that may arise in the future and discover strategies to mitigate these risks to protect and grow your wealth. Number seven, economic forecasts. Benefit from the economic forecast and projection included in Project 2025, helping you to plan your investments and financial moves with greater accuracy. Number eight, networking opportunities. By understanding the key players and stakeholders discussed in Project 2025, you can identify potential networking opportunities that can enhance your wealth building efforts. Number nine, sustainable practices. The document highlights sustainable and ethical business practices, encouraging you to incorporate these into your ventures, which can attract more investors and customers. And number 10, personal growth. Reading Project 2025 can inspire personal growth and development, encouraging you to adopt a proactive and visionary mindset that is crucial for achieving long term financial success. Project 2025 is not just a mandate for leadership, it's a roadmap for those looking to build and sustain wealth in a rapidly changing world. Dive into this comprehensive guide and arm yourself with the knowledge and strategies needed to thrive in 2024 and beyond. Now, does that sound like a document you want to take a listen to? So, Adrian Mays with the Random Acts of Kindness Bespoke started on Independence Day, started reading Project 2025 on this YouTube channel live, Facebook, LinkedIn. So, here's the great thing: part one, part two, part three, part four, part five, part six, part seven, part eight, part nine, part 10 are already completed. So, I'm going to keep going. So right now we're on chapter 13, and how you actually can access the Project 2025 is literally to go to the website. They have the website, the project2025.org. And on the website, you'll see the 922 document. Seems a little intimidating, right? So the random acts of kindness is literally helping people in regards to just making sure we just at least find out what's in it first, and then understand it, and then take it and chop it up or what have you. But listen, and if you don't want to read it yourself, but read it or listen to it or don't listen to it. But the information is provided for those that want it. So if not, that's what we do. So just picking up where we left off, which we left off on chapter 13, Environmental Protection Agency. Okay. Adriane Mays, here we go. You ready? Mission statement: creating a better environmental tomorrow with clean air, safe water, healthy soil, and thriving communities. A conservative U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, will take a more supportive role toward local and state efforts, building them up so that they may lead in a meaningful fashion. This will include the sharing of federal resources and agency expertise. Creating environmental standards from the ground up is consistent with the concept of cooperative federalism embedded within many of the agency's authorizing statutes, and will create earnest relationships among local officials and regulated stakeholders. This, in turn, will promote a culture of compliance. A conservative EPA will track success by measured progress as opposed to the current perpetual process, and will convey this progress to the public in clear, concise terms. True transparency will be a defining characteristic of a conservative EPA. This will be reflected in all agency work, including the establishment of open source science to build not only transparency and awareness among the public, but also trust. The challenge of creating a conservative EPA will be to balance justified skepticism toward an agency that has long been amenable to being coopted by the left for political ends against the need to implement the agency's true function, protecting public health and the environment in cooperation with states. Further, the EPA needs to be realigned away from attempts to make it an all powerful energy and land use policymaker and return to its congressionally sanctioned role as environmental regulator. Overview: the status quo. Not surprisingly, the EPA under the Biden administration has returned to the same top down coercive approach that defined the Obama administration. There has been a reinstitution of unachievable standards designed to aid in the transition away from political disfavored industries and technologies and toward the Biden administration's preferred alternatives. This approach is most obvious in the Biden administration's assault on the energy sector, as the administration uses its regulatory might to make coal, oil, and natural gas operations very expensive and increasingly inaccessible, while forcing the economy to build out and rely on unreliable renewables. This approach has also been applied to pesticides and chemicals as the Biden administration pushes the greening of agriculture and manufacturing, among other industrial activities. As a consequence of this approach, we see the return of costly job killing regulations that serve to depress the economy and grow the bureaucracy, but do little to address, much less resolve, complex environmental problems. In some instances, these actions even work to undermine environmental efforts as they push industries overseas to countries whose enforcement of pollution control requirements is seriously deficient, if indeed they have any meaningful requirements at all. Meanwhile, agency costs and staffing have increased significantly. The EPA's fiscal year 2023 request included a 28.8% increase in funding and a 13.3% increase in staffing, making it the highest funding ever in EPA's history. Compared to the Obama administration, there is one key difference in the Biden administration's approach. In a concerted effort to diminish congressional oversight, the position of EPA administrator has been overshadowed by the creation of multiple climate Caesars at the Biden's White House. In effect, current EPA Administrator Michael Regan, who has a reputation as a well-meaning, generally capable former state official, has been left out of the political loop, serving most as a pleasant distraction from EPA's expansive, costly, and economy-destroying agenda. A co-opted mission. The EPA has been breeding ground for expansion of the federal government's influence and control across the economy. Embedded activists have sought to evade legal restraints in pursuit of a global climate themed agenda, aiming to achieve that agenda by implementing costly policies that otherwise have failed to gain the requisite political traction in Congress. Many EPA actions in liberal administrations have simply ignored the will of Congress. aligning instead with the goals and wants of political connected activists. Pursuit of this globally focused agenda has distracted the agency from fulfilling its core mission, thereby creating a backlog of missed statutory deadlines and at times has even led to preventable environmental disasters. During the Obama administration, for example, the US experienced two of the worst environmental disasters in decades, including the Flint, Michigan water crisis in 2014 and the Gold King mine spill in 2015. Beyond creating such immediate and tangible harm in various communities, an EPA led by activism and a disregard for the law has generated uncertainty in the regulated community, vendetta driven enforcement, weighted analytics, increased costs, and diminished trust in final agency actions. Although the US environmental story is very positive, there has been a return to fear based rhetoric within the agency, especially as it pertains to the perceived threat of climate change. Mischaracterizing the state of our environment generally and the actual harms reasonably attributable to climate change. Specifically, it is a favored tool that the left uses to scare the American public into accepting their ineffective, liberty crushing regulations, diminish private property rights, and exorbitant costs. In effect, the Biden EPA has once again presented a false choice to the American people that they have to choose between a healthy environment and a strong, growing economy. Historical role and purpose. For many decades, rapid industrial activity with an unorganized approach to environmental standards significantly degraded the country's environment. Particle pollution in the form of a thick fog like haze that at times was laced with harmful metals was a frequent occurrence across the country. More than 40% of communities failed to meet basic water quality standards, and in 1969, the Cuyahoga River infamously caught fire after sparks from a passing train ignited debris in the water, which was filled with heavy industrial waste. EPA was established on December 2nd, 1970, following a call by President Richard Nixon to rationally and systematically organize existing piecemeal efforts to clean up and protect the environment. Under Reorganization Plan Number 3, the EPA was to initiate a coordinated attack on the pollutants which debase the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the land that grows our food. Numerous authorities were consolidated and given to the EPA, including research, monitoring, standard setting, and enforcement activities. The mission to protect public health and the environment was born, and the first administrator was sworn on December 4th, 1970. Congress followed suit with the landmark Clean Air Act of 1970, CAA, and the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1972. The subsequent Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 played a significant role in the expansion of EPA's responsibilities and legal authority, with the agency then being tasked with the development of new regulatory mechanisms that included, among other things, cap and trade programs for the control of sulfur dioxide and technological standards for nitrogen oxide emissions from coal-fired power plants, a vastly expanded hazardous air pollutant program, a federal operating permit program, and new regulations governing phase out of the production of ozone depleting substances in conjunction with US ratification of the Montreal Protocol in 1988. Subsequently, especially during the Obama administration, EPA experienced massive growth as it was used to pursue far-reaching political goals to the point where its current activities and staffing levels far exceeded its congressional mandates and purpose. This expansive status is entirely unnecessary. It has nothing to do with improving either the environment or public health. The EPA's initial success was driven by clear mandates, a streamlined structure, recognition of the state's prominent role, and built-in accountability. Fulfilling the agency's mission in a manner consistent with a limited government approach proved to be extremely effective during the agency's infancy. Back to basics. EPA structure and mission should be greatly circumcised to reflect the principles of cooperative federalism and limited government. This will require significant restructuring and streamlining of the agency to reflect the following: state leadership. EPA should earnest relationships with state and local officials and assume a more supportive role by sharing resources and expertise, recognizing that the primary role in making choices about the environment belongs to the people who live in it. Accountable progress. Regulatory efforts should focus on addressing tangible environmental problems with practical, cost beneficial, affordable solutions to clean up the air, water, and soil, and the results should be measured and tracked by simple metrics that are available to the public. Streamline process. Duplicative, wasteful, or superfluous programs that do not tangibly support the agency's mission should be eliminated, and a structured management program should be designed to assist state and local governments in protecting public health and the environment. Healthy, thriving communities. EPA should consider and reduce as much as possible the economic costs of its actions on local communities to help them thrive and prosper. Compliance before enforcement. EPA should foster cooperative relationships with the regulated community, especially small businesses that encourage compliance over enforcement. Transparent science and regulatory analysis. EPA should make public and take comment on all scientific studies and analysis that support regulatory decision making. Administrator's Office and Reorganization Responsibility. The Office of the Administrator, AO, is intended to provide executive and logistical support for the EPA Administrator. Its stated purpose is to support EPA leadership and activities, to implement policies that are consistent with the conservative EPA. The agency will have to undergo a major reorganization. The Deputy Chief of Staff or policy position within the Administrator's Office should be renamed the Deputy Chief of Staff for Regulatory Improvement. This position would oversee a reorganization effort that includes the following actions: returning the environmental justice function to the AO, eliminating the standalone Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, returning the enforcement and compliance function to the media offices, air, water, land, and emergency management, etc., and eliminating the standalone Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assistance, which has created a mismatch between standard setting and implementation. Using enforcement to ensure compliance, not to achieve extra statutory objectives. Developing a plan for relocating regional offices so that they are more accessible to the areas they serve and deliver cost savings to the American people. Restructuring the Office of International and Tribal Affairs into the American Indian Environmental Office and returning the international liaison function to the media offices where appropriate. Eliminating the Office of Public Engagement and Environmental Education as a standalone entity and reabsorbing substantial elements into the Office of Public Affairs. Relocating the Office of Children's Health Protection and the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization from the AO and reabsorbing those functions within the media office, air, water, land, and emergency management, etc. Reviewing the grants program to ensure that taxpayer funds go to organizations focused on tangible environmental improvements free from political affiliation. Resetting science advisory boards to expand opportunities for a diversity of scientific viewpoints free of potential conflicts of interest. Restoring the guidance portal to ensure that regulatory and sub-regulatory standards are clear to affected entities. Working with assistant administrators to implement major reforms in media offices. Day one, executive order. To initiate the review and reorganization, a day one executive order should be drafted for the incoming president with explicit language requiring reconsideration of the agency structure with reference to fulfilling its mission to create a better environmental tomorrow with clean air, safe water, healthy soil, and thriving communities. The order should set up pause and review teams to assess the following: major rules and guidance materials, identify existing rules to be stayed and reproposed, and initiate rule development in appropriate media offices, pending petitions, grant new petitions for rule reconsideration and stays of rules, grants. Stop all grants to advocacy groups and review which potential federal investments will lead to tangible environmental improvements. Legal settlements. Reassess any sue and settle cases and develop a new policy to establish review and oversight, including public notification and participation. Employee review. Determine the opportunity to downsize by terminating the newest hires in low value programs and identify relocation opportunities for senior executive service SES positions. Budget review. Develop a tier down approach to cut costs, reduce the number of full time equivalent positions, and eliminate duplicative position programs. EPA should not conduct any ongoing or planned activity for which there is not clear and current congressional authorization, and it should communicate this shift in the president's first budget request. Risk management policy. Revise guidance documents that control regulations such as the social cost of carbon, discount rates, timing of regulatory review, before options are selected, casualty of health effects, low dose risk estimation, linear no threshold analysis, and employment loss analysis. Personnel. The majority of the political appointee team must be assembled, vetted, and ready to deploy before day one. To the extent provided by the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, appointees in consideration for Senate confirmed positions, excluding the administrator, should be prepared to serve as a deputy or principal deputy to get into the agency on day one while their nomination and affiliated confirmation processes proceeds. In addition to a deputy slated for the assistant administrator role, each office will need a political chief of staff, senior advisors designated to run sub offices, and energized assistants. Teams should be balanced with technical knowledge, legal expertise, and political exposure. Ideally, they should also be geographically diverse. Appointee positions should also extend to all the regional offices and specialty labs. Office of Air and Radiation, OAR. OAR develops national programs, policies, and regulations to control air pollution and radiation exposure. In recent decades, OAR and its statutory responsibilities under the Clean Air Act have been reimagined in an attempt to expand the reach of the federal government. The U.S. Supreme Court has stopped and stricken several actions from OAR under liberal administrations, citing a lack of requisite legal support. A reformed OAR should focus on EPA's mission of limiting and minimizing criteria and hazardous air pollutants in partnership with the states. Cross-cutting reforms. OAR consists of 4 sub-offices, with 2 located in Washington, D.C., 1 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and 1 at Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, North Carolina. The following reforms should be implemented across all OAR offices. Issue a rule to ensure consistent and transparent consideration of costs. When doing cost benefit analysis, use appropriate discount rates. Focus on the benefits of reducing the pollutant targeted by Congress. Identify co-benefits separately and acknowledge the uncertainties involved in quantifying benefits. Review and revise reasonably available control technology. Cost guidance to ensure that calculations are accurate and reflect the actual regulatory burden, including costs of air rules, implementation, and compliance. Obey Congress's direction in CAA 321 to conduct continuing evaluations of the employment and plant closure effects of air regulations. Ensure that all provisions of CAA 307D are observed Congress placed special constraints on air rules, and that intent should be respected. To the extent that the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, remains in place, ensure to the maximum extent possible that grants and funding are provided to state regulatory entities and not to nonprofits. Remove any regulations or requirements that confer on third parties. Any authorities that have been provided to EPA, such as the oil and gas supplemental, which created a super emitter response program that allows third parties to act as EPA enforcers. Policy specific actions. National Ambient Air Quality Standards, NAAQS. EPA adopted by regulation a goal of restoring natural visibility by 2064. The statute does not require this, and EPA should consider whether a longer timeline is less disruptive or more realistic. Regional haze rules should be revised to prevent subsequent planning periods from being abused to compel the shutdown of disfavored facilities. Under the good neighborhood, uh-oh. I was under the good neighborhood. Dang, where is it? Mhm. Oh, there it is. Haha. Under the Good Neighbor program, Interstate Pollutant Transport Program, never give up. I never give up. Haha. Okay. Okay. Let me hold on. Okay. Anyway. Under the Good Neighbor program, Interstate Pollutant Transport Program, review Biden era regulations to ensure that they do not over control upwind states in violation of the statute as construed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Reverse the program's 2022 expansion beyond power plants. Putting guardrails on downwind states in an abuse of the CAA 126B petition process. EPA must ensure, in keeping with the statutory text, that petitions identify a reasonably discrete group of upwind sources alleged to violate the Good Neighbor provision. Ensure that the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, CASAC, considers all of the statutorily charged factors, for example, social and economic effects resulting from NAAQS, attainment, and maintenance strategies. Ensure that the requirements EPA puts on a state that has achieved attainment status from non-attainment status are limited to those that are statutorily required, and remove any regulatory differences between attainment and maintenance that are not explicitly required by law. Streamline the process for state and local governments to demonstrate that their federally funded highway projects will not interfere with NAAQS attainment. Adopt policies to prevent abuse of EPA's CAA Air Connection Authority. EPA historically has used this to coerce states into adopting its favorite policies on pain of imposition of a federal implementation plan. Limit EPA's reliance on CAA 301, general rulemaking authority, to ensure that it is not abused to issue regulation for which EPA lacks substantive authority elsewhere in the statute. If possible, return the standard setting role to Congress. Climate change. Remove the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, GHGRP, for any source category that is not currently being regulated. The overall reporting program imposes significant burdens on small businesses and companies that are not being regulated. This is either a pointless burden or a sword of Damocles, threat of future regulation, neither of which is appropriate. Establish a system with an appropriate deadline to update the 2009 endangerment finding. Establish a significant emission rate, SER, for greenhouse gases, GHGs. Regulating hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, under the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. Repeal Biden administration implementing regulations for the AIM Act that are unnecessarily stringent and costly. Refrain from granting petitions from opportunistic and manufacturers to add new restrictions that further skew the market toward costlier refrigerants and equipment. Conduct realistic cost assessments that reflect actual consumer experiences instead of the current unrealistic ones, claiming that the program is virtually cost free. Mobile source regulation by the Office of Transportation and Air Quality. Establish GHG car standards under Department of Transportation (DOT) leadership that properly consider cost, choice, safety, and national security. Review the existing ramp rate for car standards to ensure that it is actually achievable. Include life cycle emissions of electric vehicles and consider all of their environmental impacts. Restore the position that California's waiver applies only to California specific issues like ground level ozone, not global climate issues. Ensure that other states can adopt California's standards only for traditional criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases. Stop the use of the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, to increase standards on airplanes. Reconsider the Cleaner Trucks Initiative to balance the goal of driving down emissions without creating significant costs or complex burdens on the industry. Air permitting reforms for new source review, pre-construction permits, and Title V operating permits. Develop reforms to ensure that when a facility improves efficiency within its production process, new permitting requirements are not triggered. Restore the Trump EPA position on once in, always in, that major sources can convert to area sources when affiliated emission standards are met. Revisit permitting and enforcement assumptions that sources will operate 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. This artificially inflates a source's potential to emit PTE, which can result in more stringent permanent terms. We're on page 459 of 922 of the download and 426 on the PDF. Defend the position that petitions to object to Title V should not be used to second guess previous state decisions. Clarify the relationship between new source review and Title V to ensure that Title V is used only as intended by Congress. CAA Section 111. Restore the position that EPA cannot regulate a new pollutant from an already regulated source category without making predicate findings for that new pollutant. Institute automatic withdrawal of any proposed rule that is not finalized within the statutorily prescribed 1-year period. Revise general implementing regulations for existing source regulatory authority under CAA 111D to ensure that EPA gives full meaning to Congress's direction, including source-specific application, and the state planning program is flexible, federalist, and differential to the states. CAA Section 112, hazardous air pollutants. Unregulated points or non-point source fugitive emissions of an already regulated hazardous air pollutant do not require a maximum available control technology (MACT) standard. Ensure that Section 112 regulations are harmonized with Section 111 regulations that apply to the same sector sources. Ensure that cost-benefit analysis is focused on regulations targeted pollutant and separately identify ancillary or co-benefits. Radiation. Assess and update the agency's radiation standards so that they align with those of other agencies, including the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Department of Energy, and Department of Transportation, as well as international standards. Level set past misleading statements regarding radiological risk and reassess the linear none threshold standard. Personnel budget and office restructuring. Place a political appointee in Ann Arbor, Michigan for the Office of Transportation and Air Quality, OTAQ, regulating mobile service sources, and a political appointee in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, for the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards, OAQPS, regulating stationary sources, and give those appointees the request requisite titles and authority to oversee the OTAQ and OAQPS staff. Establish a political chief of staff in DC to manage the entire air office. Pull the Renewable Fuel Standard RFS program out of OTAQ. Establish its own sub office in DC with status parallel to OTAQ and OAQPS that is headed by a political appointee. And establish a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Energy to work together to establish RFS programs. Require regional air offices to receive approval from OAR before moving forward with enforcement actions in order to ensure that enforcement is meeting the requirements established by regulations and is not going beyond them. Office of Water. OW. OW is responsible for ensuring safe drinking water and restoring and maintaining oceans, watersheds, and their aquatic ecosystems to protect human health, support economic and recreational activities, and provide healthy habitats for fish, plants, and wildlife. Its two main statutes include implementing the Clean Water Act, CWA, and Safe Drink Water Act, SDWA. OW has generated a large number of expansive regulations that infringe on private property rights, most notably with the Waters of the U.S. program. Needed reforms. The overarching theme for reform is guidance on guidance. OW relies heavily on guidance documents that are outdated and that sometimes have been in a deliberative state for years. Additionally, there are significant issues surrounding OW's holding up guidance as something more than simply guidance, as something akin to law in certain circumstances. The August 6, 2019 Office of Water Policy for Draft Documents Memorandum should be strictly enforced to ensure transparency as well as good governance by not letting guidance linger in draft form and by also ensuring that guidance documents are clearly just that, guidance. They do not have the effect of law and should not be treated by the law as if they did have any such effect. As a matter of raw practice, OW should be complying with statutorily established deadlines in all situations, with only minimal exceptions. In cases where statutory deadlines will not be met, senior management should be made aware of the delay and should have an opportunity to determine whether alternative courses should be taken. Depending on the outcome of regulations from the Biden administration, as well as intervention by the Supreme Court on both waters of the United States, WOTUS, and CWA Section 401, the repeal and reissuance of new regulations should be pursued. New policies. New regulations should include the following: a WOTUS rule that makes clear what is and is not a navigable water and respects private property rights. Coordinate with Congress to develop legislation, if necessary, to codify the definition in Rapanos versus United States that waters of the United States can refer only to relatively permanent, standing, or continuously flowing bodies of water, as opposed to ordinarily dry channels through which water occasionally or intermittently flows. A rule that provides clarity and regulatory certainty regarding the CWA Section 401 water quality certification process to limit unnecessary delay for needed projects, including by establishing a discharge-only approach with a limited scope from point sources into navigable waters, assessing only water quality factors that are consistent with specific CWA sections, and excluding speculative analysis regarding future potential harm. A rule to ensure that CWA Section 308 has a clear and enforced time limit. A rule to clarify the standard for criminal negligence under CWA Sections 402 and 404. A rule to prohibit retroactive or preemptive permits under CWA Section 404. A rule to promote and shape nutrient trading that utilizes a carrot versus stick approach when dealing with nutrient compliance. A rule to update compensatory mitigation that imposes no new or additional requirements beyond current law. A rule on updates necessary for the effective use of the CWA needs survey. An executive order requiring EPA to find avenues and expedite the process for states obtaining primacy in available CWA and SDWA programs. This order would require coordination with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of the Interior. Implementation of additional policies to address challenges in water workforce, issues surrounding timely actions on primary applications, and cybersecurity. Budget. While the overall goal is certainly to reduce government spending, there's one very targeted area where increased spending would be in the nation's interest. The Clean Water Act needs survey is the entire basis for how congressionally appropriated funds directed to state revolving funds, standard annual appropriations that are the true underpinning of all infrastructure funding for drinking water and clean water, are distributed by EPA across the country. Because this program is currently underfunded, money is being thrown at untargeted locations while water infrastructure is crumbling at other locations. Increased targeted funding would greatly benefit water systems across the country at a time when intervention is crucial, leaving fewer communities with significant water services challenges. Personnel, OW, would benefit greatly from the reshifting of SES employees to different programs and from headquarters out to regional offices. Office of Land and Emergency Management, OLEM. OLEM's mission is to partner with other federal agencies, states, tribes, local governments, and communities to clean up legacy pollution and revitalize land for reuse. OLEM executes this mission by protecting human health and the environment while leveraging economic opportunities and creating jobs. OLEM also oversees the agency's emergency response. The main statutes that OLEM executes are the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, to regulate waste management, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA, to clean up Superfund sites and provide resources for cleaning up brownfield sites, and Section 112R of the Clean Air Act to reduce the likelihood of accidental chemical releases. Needed reforms. OLEM's main function is to oversee the execution of cleanups under CERCLA and RCRA. Therefore, it is critical that OLEM staff focus on project management more than policy creation. Emphasizing productivity more than process and policies can result in more work on the ground in communities where Americans live and work. OLEM can accomplish this goal by determining the scope of work based on an actual reduction in exposure to chemicals as opposed to the elimination of theoretical potential exposures. To manage cleanups more effectively, OLEM should require training and project management for project managers as opposed to all staff having a general science background. Adopt EPA's Lean Management System, ELMS, across all OLEM programs. Delegate all CERCLA authority from the administrator to the OLEM assistant administrator, as opposed to a direct delegation to the regional administrators. Find opportunities to transfer work and funding to states and tribes. New policies, Superfund. To execute more efficient and effective cleanups, the following changes are needed in the Office of Superfund Remediation and Technology Innovation, OSRTI. Revise the National Oil and Hazardous Substances Pollution Contingency Plan, NCP, to modernize and streamline the cleanup process using lessons learned from the execution of the NCP over the past 40 plus years. Increase the use of CERCLA removal authority to execute short term cleanups, which will provide clarity and finality for potential responsible parties, PRPs, and return closed cleanup land to communities more swiftly. Streamline the process for determining applicable or relevant and appropriate requirements based on commonalities across sites as opposed to making such determinations on a site by site basis. Revise groundwater cleanup regulations and policies to reflect the challenges of omnipresent contaminants like PFAS. Revisit the designation of PFAS chemicals as hazardous substances under CERCLA. Allow PRPs to perform the statutorily required 5-year reviews of Superfund cleanups to free OLEM resources. Expand and fully stand up the Office of Mountains, Deserts, and Plains to support innovative approaches to the cleaning up of abandoned mines. Develop and execute a 10-year cleanup plan to address lead at all existing cleanup sites that includes benchmarks and milestones that allow for congressional and public oversight of the schedule. RCRA. To streamline waste management, the following changes are needed in the Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery, ORCR. Create an RCRA post-closure care permit that is tailored only to post-closure obligations. Modify regulations that impede resource efficiency, recycling, and reuse by providing clearly that these materials are not waste. This can be done by promulgating a rule that provides an alternative pathway to hazardous waste regulation to allow the transport of a material to legitimate recyclers or back to manufacturers to support the recycling and reuse of material. Change the electronic manifest, e-manifest regulations to a 100% electronic system and eliminate all paper manifest and manual filing and data input. This system should operate from a range of common handheld devices and could be expanded to accommodate a solid waste and materials for reuse and recycling. Reassign regulation and enforcement of air emission standards under the authority of RCRA Section 3004 to OAR and revise and modernize the regulations to comport and integrate with CAA rules. If a new risk management program RMP rule is finalized by the Biden administration, it should be revised to reflect the amendments finalized in 2019 to protect sensitive information. Personnel. The following organizational changes could create resources efficiencies to focus on the highest value opportunities. Eliminate or consolidate the regional laboratories and allow OLEM to use EPA, other government or private labs based on expertise and costs. Consolidate non-core functions, communications, economics, congressional relations, etc., into one OLEM sub-office to allow the subject matter's offices to focus on the execution of field work. Eliminate the Office of Emergency Management and reassign its functions. Move the emergency management function, currently OEM, into Homeland Security under the Administrator's Office. Number 2, incorporate removal authority, currently OEM, into OSRTI. Number 3, retain the oversight and enforcement of the RMP program within OLEM. And number 4, drop emergency management from OLEM's name. Budget. While the overall goal is certainly to reduce government scope and spending, OLEM's programs present the best opportunity to use taxpayer dollars to execute EPA's core mission of cleaning up contamination. Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, OCSPP. OCSPP primarily oversees the regulation of new and existing chemicals under the Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA, and the regulation of pesticides under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, FIFRA, and Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, FFDCA. These activities are managed in two separate offices within OCSPP, the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics, OPPT, Chemicals, and Office of Pesticide Programs, OPP, Pesticides. OCSPP is constantly pressured to ban the use of certain chemicals, typically based on fear as a result of mischaracterized or incompetent or incomplete science. Needed reforms and new policy in OPPT chemicals. Ensure that decision making risk based rather than defaulting to precautionary hazard based approaches like the Integrated Risk Information Systems, IRIS. Focus the scope of chemical evaluations on pathways of exposure that are not covered by other programs, offices, and other environmental statutes, and eliminate scope creep to ensure that evaluations can be completed in a timely manner consistent with the statutory requirements. Ensure that new chemical evaluations are conducted in a timely manner, consistent with statutory requirements to ensure the competitiveness of U.S. manufacturers. For new chemicals, reset the program to ensure the reviews are completed on a timeline that is consistent with the statute. This includes revisiting the regulations governing the reviews of new chemicals. Ensure that risk evaluations and risk management rules presume that workplaces are following all OSHA requirements, including requirements for personnel protective equipment, PPE. Apply real world use of chemicals when assessing conditions of use for risk evaluations. Transition the Safer Choice program to the private sector. Right size the TSCA's fees rules so that it's consistent with the task with the agency is actually completing within the timelines of the statute and is not covering the costs of EPA inefficiency or overreach. Revise existing policies to address the requirements of the 2016 Lautenberg amendments to the TSCA. Develop a framework rule for risk management approaches that will be used under TSCA for existing chemicals. Needed reforms and new policy in OPP, pesticides. OPP should rely on Department of Agriculture and state usage data that reflect actual pesticides use in registration reviews and Endangered Species Act analysis. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service should rely on similar data in their ESA analysis. OPP has rigorous testing requirements that registrants must meet before pesticides are allowed on the market. However, when pesticides undergo registration review every 15 years, EPA relies on publicly available data with differing levels of quality and transparency. Data standards are needed to ensure that information relied on by EPA is made available to the agency at a similar level as the original testing data conducted by registrants to ensure that EPA can conduct a robust review and analysis of the data. ESA reform for pesticides is necessary. When approving pesticides, FIFRA allows for cost benefit analysis balancing, recognizing that pesticides are effective precisely because they harm pests. However, the ESA does not allow for any consideration of the beneficial effects of pesticides. In order to meet ESA's obligations, pesticide uses are severely restricted, leaving growers with limited tools for crop protection. New policies are needed to ensure that other program offices such as ORD, OW, and OLEM will defer to OPP on toxicity issues. OPP has rigorous testing requirements for pesticide ingredients and products to ensure before they go to market that their use will not harm human health and the environment. Assessments by other offices are redundant. While individual pesticides registrations are considered adjudications and not reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, consistent with a 1993 OMB guidance. When pesticide tolerances and registrations are withdrawn by the agency, as opposed to being withdrawn voluntarily by registrants, these actions should undergo coordinated interagency review managed by OMB. Budget. The Biden administration has expanded the scope and breadth of regulatory actions with respect to OPPT and OPP, but both programs continue to maintain that resources insufficient. OPPT chemicals suffers from a lack of leadership and inability to complete the most basic requirements efficiently and in a timely fashion. While EPA has asked for more resources, including higher industry fees, it is not clear that it has the capacity to use additional dollars efficiently. With regards to OPP pesticides, pesticide manufacturers feel that the program is underfunded and would like its budget to be increased so that the pesticide actions can be reviewed more quickly. Manufacturers are also willing to pay higher fees to the fee-based proportion of the program. However, grower groups have been disappointed by EPA's actions and have significant concerns about EPA's ability to conduct science-based risk assessments and take risk management actions that are appropriately balanced benefits and risk as required by FIFRA. Guardrails and 30-party audits should be part of any funding increases through the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act, PRIA, or other mechanisms. Office of Research and Development, ORD, and related science activities. While much of this work has not been authorized by law, EPA conducts a wide variety of intramural and extramural research, development, regulatory science, science advisory, peer review, risk assessment, and risk management activities. This enterprise includes the Office of Research and Development, ORD, the agency's largest employer, as well as science activities across the other key programs, regions, and cross-cutting parts of the administrator's office. EPA's scientific enterprise, including ORD, has rightly been criticized for decades as precautionary, bloated, unaccountable, closed, outcome-driven, hostile to public and legislative input, and inclined to pursue political rather than purely scientific goals. Needed reforms, day one priorities. Notify Congress that EPA will not conduct any ongoing or planned science activity for which there is not clear in current congressional authorization. This priority should be underscored in the president's first budget request. The new president's inauguration day regulatory review freeze directives should avoid exceptions for EPA actions. This freeze should explicitly include quasi-regulatory actions, including assessments, determinations, standards, and guidance that have failed to go through the notice and comment process and may date back for years. Pause for review all contracts above $100,000 with a heavy focus on major external peer reviews and regulatory models. Call for the public to identify areas where EPA has inconsistently assessed risk, failed to use the best science, or participated in research misconduct. Eliminate the use of unauthorized regulatory inputs like the social costs of carbon, black box, and proprietary, I can't say it, models and unrealistic climate scenarios, including those based on representative concentration pathway, RCP 8.5. Personnel. Quickly nominate a reform-minded assistant administrator for research and development. Appoint and empower a science advisor reporting directly to the administrator, in addition to a substantial investment, no fewer than 6 senior political appointees charged with overseeing and reforming EPA research and science activities. Qualifications for these positions should emphasize management, oversight, and execution skills, including in leading state and environmental agencies, as opposed to personal scientific output. Suspend and review the activities of EPA advisory bodies. many of which have not been authorized by Congress, lack independence, balance, and geographic and viewpoint diversity. Retract delegations for key science and risk assessment decisions from from assistant administrators, regional offices, and career officials. Eliminate the use of Title 42 hiring authority that allows ORD to spend millions in taxpayer dollars for salaries of certain employees above the civil service scale. Announce plans to streamline and reform EPA's poorly coordinated and managed laboratory structure. Budget back to basics, rejection of unauthorized or expired science activities. A top priority should be the immediate and consistent rejection of all EPA, ORD, and science activities that have not been authorized by Congress. In fiscal year 2022, according to EPA's opaque budgeting efforts, science and technology activities total nearly $730 million. EPA's fiscal year 2023 budget request for the Office of Research and Development seeks funds for more than 1,850 employees, a dramatic increase for what is already the largest EPA office with well above 10% of the agency's workforce. ORD conducts a wide range of series of science and peer review activities, some in support of regulatory programs established by our environmental laws, but often lacks authority for these specific endeavors. Several ORD offices and programs, many of which constitute unaccountable efforts to use scientific determinations to drive regulatory enforcement and legal decisions, should be eliminated. The Integrated Risk Information System, for example, was ostensibly designed by EPA to evaluate hazard and dose response for certain chemicals. Despite operating since the 1980s, the program has never been authorized by Congress and often sets safe levels based on questionable science and below background levels, resulting in billions in economic costs. The program has been criticized by a wide variety of stakeholder states. Congress, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, NASEM, and the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, among others. EPA has failed to implement meaningful reforms, and this unaccountable program threatens key regulatory processes as well as the integrity of Clean Air Act and TSCA implementation. Needed EPA advisory body reforms. EPA currently operates 21 federal advisory committees. These committees often play an outsized role in determining agency specific and regulatory policy, and their membership has too often been handpicked to achieve certain political positions. In the Biden administration, key EPA advisory committees were purged of balanced perspectives, geographic diversity, important regulatory and private sector experience, and state, local, and tribal expertise. Contrary to congressional directives and recommendations from the GAO and intergovernmental associations, these moves eviscerated historic levels of participation on key committees by state, local, and tribal members from 2017 to 2020. As a result, a variety of EPA regulations lack relevant scientific perspectives, increasing the risk of economic fallout and the failure of cooperative federalism. EPA also has repeatedly disregarded legal requirements regarding the role of these advisory committees in the hope of scientific advice on key regulations. Needed science policy reforms. Instead of allowing these efforts to be misused for scaremongering risk, communications, and enforcement activities, EPA should embrace so-called citizen sciences and deputize the public to subject the agency science to greater scrutiny, especially in areas of data analysis, identification of scientific flaws, and research misconduct. In addition, EPA should shift responsibility for evaluating misconduct away from its Office of Scientific Integrity, which has been overseen by environmental activists and toward an independent body. Work, including with Congress, to provide incentives similar to those under the False Claims Act for the public to identify scientific flaws and research misconduct, thereby saving taxpayers from having to bear the costs involved in spending unnecessary resources. Avoid proprietary black box models for key regulations. Nearby, all major EPA regulations are based on non transparent models for which the public lacks access for, which significant costs prevent the public from understanding agency analysis. Reject precautionary default models and uncertainty factors. In the face of uncertainty around associations between certain pollutants and health or warfare endpoints, EPA's health EPA's heavy reliance on default assumptions like its low dose, linear, non-threshold model bake orders of magnitude of risk into key regulatory inputs and drive flawed and opaque decisions. Given the disproportionate economic impacts of top-down solutions, EPA should implement an approach that defaults to less restrictive regulatory outcomes. Refocus its research activities on accountable real world examinations of the efficacy of its regulations with a heavy emphasis on characterizing and better understanding natural background, international, and anthropogenic contributions for key pollutants. It should embrace concepts laid out in the 2018 Back to Basics process for reviewing national ambient air quality standards memo to ensure that any science and risk assessment for the NAAQS matched congressional direction. Legislative reforms. While some reforms can be achieved administratively, especially in areas where EPA clearly lacks congressional authorization for its activities, Congress should prioritize several EPA science activity reforms. Use of the Congressional Review Act for Congress to disapprove of EPA regulations and other quasi-regulatory actions and prohibit substantially some similar actions in the future. Reform EPA's Science Advisory Board and other advisory bodies to ensure independence, balance, transparency, and geographic diversity. Build on recent bipartisan proposals to increase transparency for advisory bodies, subject to the Federal Advisory Committee Act, as well as recommendation from the Administrative Conference of the U.S. to strengthen provisions for independence, accountability, geographic diversity, turnover, and public participation. This should include a prohibition on peer review activities for unaccountable third parties that lack independence or application these same principles to non-governmental peer review bodies, including NASEM. Add teeth to longstanding executive orders, memoranda, recommendations, and other policies to require that EPA regulations are based on transparent, reproducible science, as well as that the data and publications resulting from taxpayer-funded activities are made immediately available to the public. Reject funds for programs that have not been authorized by Congress, like IRIS, as well as peer review activities that have not been authorized by Congress. Revisit and repeal or reform outdated environmental statutes. A high priority should be the repeal or reform of the Global Change Research Act of 1990, which has been misused for political purposes. Repeal Inflation Reduction Act programs providing grants for environmental science activities. American Indian Office, AIO. AIO is a vital EPA function. It is mandated to carry out a 1992 Act of Congress that administers the Indian Environmental General Assistance Program. Because of the sovereign to sovereign relationship between the United States government and federally recognized sovereign Indian nations, this act's purpose is to assist tribes in developing the capacity to manage their own tribal environment protection programs and set them up to implement programs for the management of solid and hazardous waste. This office also is the chief office under which the EPA's 1984 Indian policy functions. Needed reforms. AIO should be significantly elevated as a standalone EPA assistant administrator office. This would send a clear message to American Indians and Alaska Native villages that the agency takes seriously the environmental issues plaguing Indian country. While designated a headquarters office with direct reporting to the administrator, its its location should be in the American West, closer to most tribal nations. This could include Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Dallas, Texas, or Denver, Colorado. The state of Oklahoma is considered the tribal center of America and is home to 39 federally recognized tribes, including the five civilized tribes. The other two are options are also close to numerous tribes and home to EPA regional offices. New policies. All EPA tribal grants and tribal matters should be run from this office as a one stop shop for all tribal affairs. Budget and personnel. AIO should be led by a politically appointed Senate confirmed assistant administrator, ideally one with strong ties to a federally recognized tribe. He or she should have political deputies and staff to assist the political leadership in carrying out agency policies. Career EPA tribal staff are located throughout the nation in all regional offices, but are paid mostly under the budget of the current Office of International and Tribal Affairs, which will be significantly restructured as international functions are reabsorbed into the appropriate media offices. For example, air, water, and land and emergency management. Because of this, tribal staff should be fully under the authority of the new American Indian Office and its assistant administrator, not the regional offices. Office of General Counsel, OGC. OGC serves as the chief legal advisor to EPA's policymaking officials. It also provides legal support to regional actions and enforcement and compliance litigation. OGC lawyers represent the agency in court alongside the Department of Justice, typically defending agency actions. Needed reforms and new policies. Review EPA's environmental justice and Title VI authority. Whenever possible, the Biden administration is broadening EPA's use and interpretation of environmental justice, EJ, and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 beyond long standing understandings of the legal limits of that authority. As a threshold matter, there's an opportunity to refine EJ as a tool for the agency to prioritize environmental protection efforts and assistance to communities in proximity to pollution or with the greatest need for additional protection. Allocations of agency resources increased EPA enforcement and or agency distribution of grants should be based on neutral constitutional principles. In 2023, the Supreme Court is expected to provide guidance on the constitutionality of race-based discrimination as it considers students for fair admission versus University of North Carolina. Accordingly, the next administration should pause and review all ongoing EJ and Title VI actions to ensure that they are consistent with any forthcoming SCOTUS decisions. Establish a policy of legally speaking with one voice. Some EPA offices, for example, the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance and the offices of Regional Counsel, assert legal positions and interpretations of the law that conflict with an administration's interpretation as articulated by OGC with input from program offices. It is unacceptable for the agency to have inconsistent legal positions, particularly with respect to key interpretive issues. All attorneys with authority to represent EPA, not necessarily all attorneys, should therefore be housed in OGC. These offices include the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, OECA. OECA was established during the Clinton administration. Enforcement attorneys tend to take legal positions to win cases or obtain settlements that may be inconsistent with those of OGC and program offices. OECA attorneys should be moved into OGC. Additionally, non-attorney program staff in OECA could be moved into their relevant program offices. For example, the Clean Air Act enforcement advisor could be moved into OAR. Beyond the avoidance of inconsistent legal positions, this policy would reduce the agency's overall expenditures and duplication of work. To accommodate this new function, OGC could establish a new deputy general counsel for enforcement position to manage the enforcement attorneys at headquarters and in the regions. The Office of Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs, OCIR. OCIR employees should not take legal positions in all administrations. White House counsel is key with respect to oversight issues and has an important relationship with OGC. There must be a strategic relationship between OCIR and OGC, but OGC, in consultation with agency clients and White House counsel, should assert EPA legal positions to Congress. For example, the assertion of interest regarding congressional subpoenas, witness availability and testimony, and document production. The Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, OEJ-ECR. OEJ-ECR was established during the Biden administration. EJ and civil rights functions were taken from OGC and moved into a standalone office as well as spread through the regions. OEJ-ECR should be disbanded. OEJ-ECR's attorneys should be moved back into OGC, and non-legal staff, for example, EJ policy advisors, should be moved back into the administrative office as is customary. The offices of regional counsel, ORCs. Regional EJ staff efforts, both in the ORCs and in the policymaking offices, are highly variable. EPA is therefore likely to take inconsistent legal positions. To the extent that legal positions are taken by the ORCs and or regional staff, they should be coordinated and approved by OGC and the appropriate regional leadership. For example, nearly all regional offices have EJ action plan and or EJ implementation plans. Region 1's EJ action plan is 6 pages and Region 2's is 66 pages. The Region 2 EJ action plan, for example, specifies that ORC will conduct EJ training for all legal staff to provide attorneys with a simple standard EJ analysis they can use regardless of the context, enforcement, grants, permits, referrals, etc. of the case. In addition, EPA should refrain from publicly undermining the National Environment Policy Act, NEPA, process at other agencies, and should instead focus on providing constructive technical support during the interagency process. Personnel. Review OGC resources to consider reorganization of other attorney functions and leadership for consolidation into cross-cutting issues law offices. Review telework policies and attorneys with permanent duty stations not at EPA headquarters or a regional office. Consider invoking the rotation of SES managers within OGC and OBCs to other EPA offices where appropriate. Monitor all external communications conveying a legal position. Do not allow public events at which the agency puts forth its legal position unless they are specifically approved. For example, agency webinars on sensitive issues. Budget. OGC's budget will increase with consolidation of FTE funding that allows attorneys who come from other EPA offices. Reassess duplicative skill sets with the consolidation and allow for attrition if needed. Consider allocated resources for regional recruiting to increase geographic diversity from law schools from each state. Office of Mission Support, OMS. OMS leads the agency's core mission support function to improve efficiency, coordination, and customer experience for internal customers, stakeholders, and the public, including protection of EPA's facilities and other critical assets nationwide, acquisition activities, contracts, grants management, human capital, information technology, and information management activities. Grant reform. EPA now awards up to $30 billion in grants annually, up to half of the agency's annual budget. Of these funds, $500 million is awarded as discretionary. This grant making, discretionary and otherwise, is driven by ideology instead of need. Of particular concern is a practice whereby numerous small dollar grants are administered to a great number of grantees while large grants are given to academic institutions. As a result, grant funds produce little to no meaningful improvements in the environment and public health and instead fund questionably relevant projects at elite private academic institutions that invariably produce radical environmental research. Steps should be taken to ensure that grants are awarded based on need instead of ideological affiliation or academic preference. Specifically, EPA should institute a pause and review for all grants over a certain threshold, put a political appointee in charge of the grants office to prioritize distribution of grants to those who are most in need and toward projects that will tangibly improve the environment, cap the number and dollar amounts of grants that the Office of Research and Development can award and require that they be reviewed by the Administrator's Office of the Chief Financial Officer, OCFO. OCFO formulates and manages EPA's annual budget and performance plan, coordinates EPA's strategic planning efforts, develops EPA's annual performance and accountability report, and implements the Government Performance and Results Act. Needed reforms. EPA has been audited by the agency's Inspector General for decades, well beyond accepted norms for private sector financial audits. Audit teams should be diversified. Staffing assignments, especially at the senior level, should be reviewed and streamlined, and the office should consolidate space to save agency costs. For example, six offices need six security contracts to protect employees when one contract would suffice. New policies. Review travel and reimbursement policies for best practices aligned for industry norms. Personnel. The Deputy Chief Financial Officer position is currently reserved for a career official, but political appointees may serve as associate CFO, special advisor, and other senior officials. In addition to evaluating whether the Deputy Chief Financial Officer position should be reserved for a career official, a new administration should immediately fill these positions with political appointees and establish a new political leadership position for appropriations liaison, which is currently overseen by career employees. Budget. OCFO is responsible for drafting and sharing the president's budget with Congress. The CFO often testifies along with the administrator. Efforts to simplify the budget request could improve the overall transparency and general understanding of the agency's work. Conclusion. A more conservative EPA that aligns with the policies outlined in this chapter will lead to a better environmental future without unintended consequences. It will prevent unnecessary, expenditures by the regulated community, allowing for investment in economic development and job creation, which are keys to thriving communities. Cutting EPA's size and scope will deliver savings to the American taxpayer. Improved transparency will serve as an important check to ensure that the agency's mission is not distorted or co-opted for political gain. Importantly, a conservative EPA will deliver tangible environmental improvements to the American people in the form of cleaner air, cleaner water, and healthier soils. Author's note. This chapter could not have been completed without the assistance of numerous policy experts, legal professionals, and former appointees. A special note of thanks to David Harlow, Justin Schwab, Aaron Shizazbo, Client Woods, and Scott Mason IV. The author alone assumes responsibility for this chapter. No views expressed herein should be attributed to any other individual. Thank you. And then you have the endnotes. Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, page 479, 480, 481. Then we come to the Department of Human Health and Services, chapter 14 by Roger Severino. Sorry, Roger, if I'm butchering your name. We're on page 482 out of 922, and it's 448 on the download, 449. Department of Health and Human Services. So we're going to read now, and then we're going to take a brief break at 9 to do my responsibility. Then we're going to keep going until we stop, and then we're going to just keep going. Okay, let's go. Department of Health and Human Services, Roger Severino. If the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services (HHS) were a separate country, its approximate $1.6 trillion budget would rank as the world's fifth largest national budget. For good or ill, HHS activities personally impact the lives of more Americans than do those of any other federal agency. Under President Trump, HHS was dedicated to serving all Americans from conception to natural death, including those individuals and families who face economic and social well-being challenges. Under President Biden, the mission has shifted to promoting equity in everything we do for the sake of populations sharing a particular characteristic, including race, sexuality, gender identification, ethnicity, and a host of other categories. As a result of HHS's having its lost way, U.S. life expectancy, instead of returning to normal after the COVID-19 pandemic, according continued to drop precipitously to levels not seen since 1996, with white populations alone losing 7% of their expected lifespan in just 1 year. Nothing less than America's long-term survival is at stake. Accordingly, HHS must return to serving the health and well-being of all Americans at all stages of life, instead of using social engineering that leaves us sicker, poorer, and more divided. Overview. HHS consists of 11 operating divisions that have varying degrees of practical independence from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and 15 staff divisions that are directly under the office of the Secretary. This chapter's recommendations are limited to those divisions that most need reform and address wherever possible 5 cross-cutting goals. Goal number 1, protecting life, conscience, and bodily integrity. The Secretary should pursue a robust agenda to protect the fundamental right to life, protect conscious right, and uphold bodily integrity rooted in biological realities, not ideology. From the moment of conception, every human being possesses inherent dignity and worth, and our humanity does not depend on our age, stage of development, race, or abilities. The Secretary must ensure that all HHS programs and activities are rooted in a deep respect for innocent human life from day one until natural death. Abortion and euthanasia are not healthcare. And euthanasia. A robust respect for the sacred rights of conscious both at HHS and among governments and institutions funded by it, increases choices for patients and programs beneficiaries, and furthers pluralism and tolerance. The Secretary must protect Americans' civil rights by ensuring that HHS programs and activities follow the letter and spirit of religious freedom and conscientious protection laws. Radical actors inside and outside government are promoting harmful identity politics that replaces biological sets with subjective notions of gender identity and bases a person's worth on his or her race, sex, or other identities. This destructive dogma, under the guise of equity, threatens Americans' fundamental liberties as well as the health and well being of children and adults alike. The net secretary must ensure the HHS programs protect children's minds and bodies, and that HHS programs respect parents' basic rights to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their children. Goal number two, empowering patient choices and provider autonomy. Basic economies Basic economics holds that costs tend to decrease and quality and options tend to increase when there is robust and free competition in the provision of goods and services. Healthcare is no exception. Healthcare reform should be patient centered and market based and should empower individuals to control their healthcare related dollars and decisions. Of course, providers who deliver healthcare also need the freedom to address the unique needs of their patients. States should be the primary regulators of the medical profession, and the federal government should not restrict providers' ability to discharge their responsibilities or limit their ability to innovate through government pricing controls or irrational Medicare or Medicaid reimbursement schemes. Finally, America's broken insurance system, run largely through confusing provider networks and third-party payers, employers, induces overconsumption of healthcare, limits consumer shopping, and hides true costs from patients. The federal government should focus reform on reducing burdens of regulatory compliance, unleashing innovation in healthcare delivery, ceasing interference in the daily lives of patients and providers, allowing alternative insurance coverage options, and returning control of healthcare dollars to patients making decisions with their providers about their healthcare treatments and services. Goal number three, promoting stable and flourishing married families. Families comprised of a married mother, father, and their children are the foundation of a well ordered nation and healthy society. Unfortunately, family policies and programs under President Biden's HHS are fraught with agenda items focusing on LGBTQ plus equity, subsidizing single motherhood, disincentivizing work, and penalizing marriage. These policies should be repealed and replaced by policies that support the formation of stable married nuclear families. Working fathers are essential to the well being and development of their children, but the United States is experiencing a crisis of fatherlessness that is ruining our children's futures. In the overwhelming number of cases, fathers insulate children from physical and sexual abuse, financial difficulty or poverty, incarceration, teen pregnancy, poor educational outcomes, high school failure, and a host of behavioral and psychological problems. By contrast, homes with non related boyfriends present are among the most dangerous place for a child to be. HHS should prioritize married father engagement in its messaging, health, and welfare policies. In the context of current and emerging reproductive technologies, HHS policy should never place the desires of adults over the right of children to be raised by the biological fathers and mothers who conceived them. In cases involving biological parents who are found by a court to be unfit because of abuse or neglect, the process of adoption should be speedy, certain, and supported generously by HHS. Goal number four, preparing for the next health emergency. The COVID 19 pandemic demonstrated how catastrophic a micromanaging, misinformed, centralized, and politicized federal government can be. Basic human rights, medical choice, and the doctor patient relationship were trampled without scientific justification and for extended periods of time. It's excess deaths not due to COVID-19 skyrocketed because of forced lockdowns, isolation, vaccine, related mass fringe, and colossal disruptions of the economy and daily rhythms of life. The federal government's public health apparatus has lost the public's trust. Before the next national public health emergency, this apparatus must be fundamentally restructured to ensure a transparent, scientifically grounded, and more nimble, efficient, transparent, and targeted response that respects the unique needs and input of patient populations and providers. Every one of their overreaching policies during the pandemic, from lockdowns and school closures to mask and vaccine mandates or passports, received its supposed legal justification form from the state of emergency declared and renewed by the HHS secretary. Tellingly, however, the threshold for what constitute a public health emergency, how many cases, hospitalizations, deaths, etc., was never defined. For the sake of democratic accountability, we must know with clarity what will trigger the next emergency declaration, and just as important, and what will trigger its end. So we're on page 484 out of 922. We're going to take a brief commercial break as we're about an hour and a half in. Want to show you where you can go and see parts 1 through 10. We are currently on part 11, but at Adriane Mays, you can go and check out, if you go to the live tab and check out the other Project 2025 900 mandate for leadership. So you can check out each part and listen to the actual information. So that way you're ready, and you're ready for action, building your brand. But you need to actually have this information for the Project 2025. But subscribe, follow. And this is a random acts of kindness preparing for our virtual celebration scheduled for September 11th, 2024. So again, this bespoke random acts of kindness is helping people that don't have the ability to read this massive document. And, just to have access to this is a resource online, it's a tool, it is available. And so before you get a part of the conversation, you want to be able to do your research. I'm providing transparent, no input on Adriane Mays' perspective of it as of yet, because I got to finish it first. So we got to get all the way through. We got to get all the way through to coconut's foot off the way, all the way through to 922. But we're on day 62 of the billionaire journey. And so when I go and do my obligation, we're going to go ahead and check out the day 62. I showed this earlier, but why not show it one more time here today? So we're going to show HALT, how to deal with hungry, angry, lonely. HALT, self-check for a balanced life. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Adriane Mays, The Billionaire Journey. Sometimes you got to take a breather and just stop and stand and understand that the process is right in front of you and you're exactly where you're supposed to be today. Adriane Mays, day 62 in the Billionaire in the Making journey, and realizing that all of these triggers can have significant impact on the outcome and the mood and the decision-making process that you have. It's crucial to self-check sometimes and literally understand that reevaluating your billionaire mindset, maintaining this balance helps you with clarity. This random act of kindness, reading this Project 2025, it's something that was bespoke. It was unique. And starting with the simple truth of understanding if it's something that I've never done before, which I've never read 900 pages out loud,
in a row. Um, I will always get what I've done and get it done. However, the impact that it's making, that's the part that I wasn't ready for. And the small triggers that help other people, I just didn't know the importance of just change and growth. So I just thank God for choosing me to help out move forward and achieve the goals of listening, helping people make the decision, and even addressing the issues that hold us back. Just understanding this new document before you make your next steps. A lot of people want to actually make change, but just might have fear. Fear is the first, it's, it's a lot of things, right? But it's something that we would lose if we could just get over it. And we always, all of us already possess or fail to get something we demand. But the fear is literally face everything and recover. We can demand and we can have our thoughts and we can have our ups and downs, but if we just recover over them and knowing that God has us already covered, living on a basis of unsatisfied demands, that's kind of what happens because you want one thing, but God already has the plan out there. You just got to trust it. No peace can be had unless you literally just let go and let God and let go of it. Understand that the billionaire plan will come when it's supposed to come. Understand that owning your family, your faith, your fears, your finance, and fitness is not going to be overnight. The difference between a demand and a simple request of random acts of kindness, you got to make it a daily action. It's not always just about money. Sometimes someone might not be clear on something, or just something as simple as a smile. So peace is possible for people, and when you let go of expectations, when you're trapped in the thoughts of what you think should be, your state of fear and anticipation, that's how your mind gets boggled with emotional sobriety, and it's not very conducive to understanding. So to achieve true peace, you have to surrender and let go and let God. You have to surrender and turn it all over and understand that the reality of dependence on God is the best reality you can have. Find peace, find gratitude, find humility and spirituality in regards to the security of knowing He's got you covered. So, Adrian May's AI Genius, it's essential to recognize that when we're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, these might be state of minds that we might need to make the decision to just stop. Pause, ponder, pray, and proceed before you do anything else, and take some time for yourself. Check in with yourself and regularly and address self-care and thinking clearly, because that's going to help you with better decision making. Remember, the journey to becoming a billionaire or achieving any significant goal is not just about financial success. We have to have the right moves up here before when we get there. So it's about emotional and spiritual growth as well. Having a digital franchise brand and having these opportunities to help people, that's, managing the triggers. You got to understand people, you have to meet them where they are too. So letting go of unrealistic demands, paving the way for a fulfilling future and a peaceful life, that's what you do when you plan. So, Adrian May's AI Genius, day 62. Thank you so much for joining me. And going to get back to it. We're on part 8 of Project 2025. And make sure you just take a moment today and tap into your self check. Are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Address these needs with kindness and self care for yourself. Give yourself a hug, smile for yourself, give yourself a thank you and gratitude, and thank where you are and just reflect where you were last year at this time. Remember, peace is gratitude, and it's found in you creating your own environment. So we'll be back at it in a minute in regards to part 8. But if you didn't catch 1 through 7, make sure you check those out on at Adrian Mays and share this with someone that might need to hear about this, might not want to read 900 pages. And Adrian Mays, Random Acts of Kindness, continue every day the journey together. I can, I will, I must. Stay blessed. Let's go. Keep striving for greatness. And what's dope? Detroit, one product, educate. Let's go.
Back to the lecture at hand. That was fun, wasn't it? Come on. Thank you so much for the commercial break. We're back into it. Adrian Mays coming back to you live. We're bringing Project 2025 900-page mandate for leadership, part 11. Sorry for the brief intermission. We have our little 9 o'clock requirement. So let's get right back and hop right back into the fun of Project 2025 mandate for leadership. We're reading 485 out of 922. Getting back into it now. Unaccountable bureaucrats like Anthony Fauci Anthony Fauci should never again have such a broad, unchecked power to issue health guidelines that will certainly be the basis for federal and state mandates. Never again should public health bureaucrats be allowed to hide information, ignore information, or mislead the public concerning because they believe it may lead to hesitancy on the part of the public. The only way to restore public trust in HHS as an institution capable of acting responsibly during a health emergency is through the best of disinfectant lights. Goal number 5, instituting great transparency, accountability, and oversight. The next administration should guard against the regulatory capture of our public health agencies by pharmaceutical companies, insurers, hospital conglomerates, and released economic interests that these agencies are meant to regulate. We must erect robust firewalls to mitigate these obvious financial conflicts of interest. All National Institutes of Health Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and Food and Drug Administration regulators should be entirely free from private biopharmaceutical funding. In this realm, public private partnership is a euphemism for agency capture, a thin veneer for corporatism. Funding for agencies and individual government and researchers must come directly from the government with robust congressional oversight. We must shut and lock the revolving door between government and big pharma. Regulators should have a long cooling off period on their contracts. 15 years would not be too long. That prevents them from working for companies that have been regulated. Similarly, pharmaceutical company executives should be restricted from moving from industry into positions within regulatory agencies. Finally, HHS should adopt metrics across the agency that can objectively determine the extent to which the agency's policies and programs achieve desired health and welfare outcomes, not agency outputs. What is not measured is not achieved. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. COVID and structural reform. COVID 19 exposed the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, as perhaps the most incompetent and arrogant agency in the federal government. CDC continually misjudged COVID 19 from its lethality, transmissibility, and origins to treatments. We were told masks were not needed, then they were made mandatory. CDC botched the development of COVID tests when they were needed most. When it was too late, we were told to put our lives on hold for 2 weeks to flatten the curve that turned into 2 years of interference and restrictions on the smallest details of our lives. Congress should ensure that CDC's legal authorities are clearly defined and limited to prevent a recurrence of any such arbitrary and facilitating exercise of power. The CDC should be split into two separate entities, housing its two distinct functions. On the one hand, the CDC is now responsible for collecting, synthesizing, and publishing epidemiological data from the individual states, a scientific data gathering function. This information is crucial for medical and public health researchers around the country. On the other hand, the CDC is also responsible for making public health recommendations and policies, an inescapable political function. At times, these two functions are in tension or clear conflicts. In February 2022, for example, it was reported that 2 full years into the pandemic, the agency leading the country's response to the public health emergency has published only a tiny fraction of the data it has collected, much of which could have helped state and local health officials better target their efforts to bring the virus under control. A CDC spokesman said that one of the reasons was fear that the information might be misinterpreted. These distinct functions should be separated into two entirely separate agencies with a firewall between them. We need a national epidemiological agency responsible only for publishing data and required by law to publish all of the data gathered from states and other sources. A separate agency should be responsible for public health with a severely confined ability to make policy recommendations. The CDC can and should make assessments as to the health costs and benefits of health interventions, but it has limited to no capacity to measure the social costs or benefits they may entail. For example, how much risk mitigation is worth the price of shutting down churches on the holiest day of the Christian calendar and far beyond, as happened in 2020? What is the proper balance of lives saved versus souls saved? The CDC has no business making such inherently political and often unconstitutional assessments and should be required by law to stay in its lane. The CDC's initial COVID 19 testing failures were largely the result of that agency's prioritizing its own development and production of tests using its internal staff and facilities. The private sector is much better positioned to tackle the challenges inherent in developing and manufacturing novel products, as illustrated by the relative success of the alternative approach to facilitating the development of COVID 19 vaccines and therapeutics by private companies that was adopted by the Food and Drug Administration, FDA. When it comes to testing, the CDC's role should similarly be to facilitate rather than supplement or supplant the efforts of private test developers, academic laboratories, state public health laboratories, and clinical test providers. When responding to a novel pathogen, the CDC should focus on gathering and disseminating information, including specimens needed for development of positive controls and reference panels, and ensuring that test developers can develop and validate diagnostic tests. These challenges will require a shift in priorities and culture at the CDC and throughout HHS more broadly. Most problematically, the CDC presented itself as a kind of super doctor for the entire nation. The CDC is a public health institution, not a medical institution. According to its mission statement, the agency focuses on disease prevention and control, environmental health, and health promotion and health education activities. It is not qualified to offer and usually does not purport to offer professional medical opinions applicable to specific patients. From time to time, the CDC offers findings and recommendations that, that competent medical practitioners often will consider in arriving at a professional medical judgment for a particular patient. In this respect, CDC guidelines are analogous to guidelines from other public health associations or medical societies. They are informative, not prescriptive. By statute or regulation, CDC guidance must be prohibited from taking on a prescriptive character. For example, never again should CDC officials be allowed to say in their official capacity that school children should be masked or vaccinated through a schedule or otherwise, or prohibited from learning in the school building. Such decisions should be left to parents and medical providers. We have learned that when CDC says when people should do it, readily becomes a must backed by severe punishments, including criminal penalties. CDC should report on the risk and lead the should and must policy calls to politically accountable parties. Conflicts of interest. There was a time when the CDC could not take money from the pharmaceutical industry, but in 1992, the agency discovered a loophole in federal law that allowed it to accept pharma contributions through the nonprofit CDC Foundation. The money started flowing immediately. From 2014 through 2018, the CDC Foundation received $79.6 million dollars from pharmaceutical corporations like Pfizer, Biogen, and Merck. This practice presents a stark conflict of interest that should be banned. Data systems. The COVID 19 pandemic has revealed the disastrous public health consequences of the CDC's failure to follow multiple congressional mandates to modernize its data infrastructure. Current reporting methods are burdensome frontline medical workers, yet they result only in fragmented data that are not available in real time or usable across systems. Congress should require HHS to prioritize the electronic collection and dissemination of robust primary privacy protected data that better leverages existing systems while reducing burdens on clinicians. HHS should also enter into a public private partnership with a data management expert to develop a system that makes critical information available to healthcare workers and policymakers in real time. The CDC operates several programs related to vaccine safety, including the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS, Vaccine Safety Data Link, VSD, and Clinical Immunization Safety Assessment (CISA) project. Those functions and those functions and their associated funding should be transferred to the FDA, which is responsible for post-market surveillance and evaluation of all other drugs and biological products. Respect for life and conscience. The CDC should eliminate programs and projects that do not respect human life and conscience rights and undermine family formation. It should it should ensure that it is not promoting abortion as healthcare. It should fund studies into the risk and complications of abortion and ensure that it corrects and does not promote misinformation regarding the comparative health and psychological benefits of childbirth versus the health and psychological risk of intentionally taking a human life through abortion. The CDC oversaw and funded the development and testing of the COVID-19 vaccines with abortal fetal cell lines and sensitive to the consciences of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people who objected to taking a vaccine with such a link to abortion. As evidenced by litigation across the country, it is likely that thousands were fired unjustly because of the exercise of the conscientious or faith on this question, conscientious or faith on this question, which could have been avoided with a modicum of concern for this issue from CDC. There is never any justification for ending a child's life as part of research, and the research benefits from a splicing or growing aborted fetal cells and aborted baby body parts can easily be provided by alternative sources. All such research should be prohibited as a matter of law and policy. CDC should update its public messaging about the unsurpassed effectiveness of modern fertility awareness based methods, FABMs, of family planning and stop publishing communications that conflate such methods with the long eclipse rhythm or calendar methods. CDC should fund studies exploring the evidence based methods used in cutting edge fertility awareness. Data collection. The CDC's abortion surveillance and maternity mortality reporting system are woefully inadequate. CDC abortion data are reported by states on a voluntary basis, and California, Maryland, and New Hampshire do not submit abortion data at all. Accurate and reliable statistical data, and about abortion survivors, and abortion-related maternal deaths are essential to timely, reliable public health and policy analysis. Because liberal states have now become sanctuaries for abortion tourism, HHS should use every available tool, including the cutting of funds, to ensure that every state reports exactly how many abortions take place within its borders, at what gestational age of the child, for what reason, the mother's state of residence, and by what method. It should also ensure that statistics are separated by category: spontaneous miscarriage, treatments that incidentally result in the death of a child, such as chemotherapy, stillbirths, and induced abortion. In addition, CDC should require monitoring and reporting for complications due to abortion in every instance of children being born alive after an abortion. Moreover, abortion should be clearly defined as only those procedures that internally end an unborn child's life. Miscarriage management or standard ectopic pregnancy treatments should never be conflated with abortion. Comparisons between live births and abortion should be tracked across various demographic indicators to assess whether certain populations are targeted by abortion providers and whether better prenatal physical, mental, and social care improves infant outcomes and decreases abortion rates, especially among those who are most vulnerable. The Ensuring Accurate and Complete Abortion Data Reporting Act of 2023 would amend Title 19, yeah, of the Social Security Act and Public Health Service Act to improve the CDC's abortion reporting mechanisms by requiring states as a condition of federal Medicaid payments for family planning services to report streamlined variables in a timely manner. The CDC should immediately end its collection of data on gender identity, which legitimizes the unscientific notion that men can become women and vice versa, and encourages the phenomenon of ever multiplying subjective identities. Food and Drug Administration, FDA. The FDA's mission includes ensuring the safety and efficacy of drugs, biological products, and medical devices. Federal laws that shield big pharma from competition because, because generics generally cost far less than brand name drugs. Consumers begin to save money as soon as generic product becomes on the market. The vast majority are very affordable, with 93% of generic products costing $20 or less. Savings will be even higher under proposals that prevent brand name manufacturers from slowing down or impeding the entrance of generic products into the marketplace. Specifically, the FDA should prohibit pharmaceutical companies from purposely sitting on the legal available right to be the first to sell generic versions of their drugs. Additionally, Congress should create legal remedies for generic companies to obtain samples of brand name products for their generic developments efforts and should prohibit meritless citizen petitions submitted by manufacturers to delay approval of a generic competitor. Hmm. Approval process for laboratory developed or modified medical tests. Learning from the failed early COVID 19 testing experience, Congress and the FDA should focus on reforming laws and regulations governing medical tests, especially with respect to laboratory developed tests. Commercial tests are developed with the intention of being widely marketed, distributed, and used, while laboratory developed tests are created with the intention of being used solely within one laboratory. A test developed by a lab in accordance with the protocols developed by another lab, non-commercial sharing, currently constitutes a new laboratory developed test because the lab in which it will be used is different from the initial developing lab. To encourage interlaboratory collaboration and discourage duplicative test creation and associated regulatory and logistical burdens, the FDA should introduce mechanisms through which laboratory developed tests can easily be shared with other laboratories without the current regulatory burdens. The laboratory developed test category currently encompasses a range of possible tests, many of which would be characterized more appropriately as laboratory modified tests because they are not truly novel tests, but rather modified versions of existing tests. To avoid stifling innovation and its access to medical care, the applicable statutes and regulations should be revised to facilitate greater access to such modified tests. Finally, the FDA has long held that it has regulatory authority over such tests, while others have argued that they should be considered clinical services regulated by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. The FDA currently has regulatory authority over in vitro diagnostics and under the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, CLIA. The CMS ensures that the labs meet analytical validity standards for test methods. Congress, the FDA, and the CMS need to clarify and disentangle overlapping authorities over tests to eliminate regulatory confusion. Drug shortages. The very thin profit margins and the regulatory burdens associated with generic drug manufacturing discourage inventory and capacity investments by manufacturers and contribute to drug shortages. HHS and the FDA should encourage more dependable generic drug manufacturing. The FDA should expand its current pass fail approach to drug facility inspections into a graded system that recognizes manufacturers that exceed minimum standards by investing in improving production reliability. The FDA should also add facility codes to drug packaging and construct a searchable database that cross references product codes and facility codes. That would enable wholesalers and pharmacy benefit managers to identify and preference drugs manufactured at more facilities, thus encouraging generic drug manufacturers to compete on reliability as well on price. For its part, HHS should exempt multi source generic drugs from requirements to pay rebates to Medicaid and other federally funded health programs, as those provisions penalize new investments in expanding manufacturing capacity when supply is unable to meet demand. Additionally, FDA and NIH should promote efficacy trials of new applications for generic drugs, which might include NIH funding such trials or conducting its own. Abortion pills. Abortion pills pose the single greatest threat to unborn children in a post Roe world. The rates of chemical abortion in the US has increased by more than 150% in the past decade. More than a half of an annual abortions in the US are chemical rather than surgical. The abortion pill regimen is typically a two-part process. The first pill, mifepristone, causes the death of the unborn child by cutting off the hormone progesterone, which is required to sustain a pregnancy. The second pill, misoprostol, causes contractions to induce the delivery of the dead child in uterine contents, usually into a toilet at a home. The abortion pill regimen is currently approved for up to 70 days, 10 weeks into pregnancy, and before Biden was subject to a heightened safety restriction called a risk evaluation mitigation strategy, REMS, that requires an in person visit with a physician who can check for dangerous contradictions such as ectopic ectopic pregnancies and can advise the mother seeking an abortion of the risk of chemical abortion, including hemorrhaging and what to do in such circumstances. Chemical abortion has been found to have a complication rate 4 times higher than that of surgical abortion. Since its approval more than 20 years ago, mifepristone has been associated with 26 deaths of pregnant mothers, over 1,000 hospitalizations, and thousands more adverse events, but that number does not account for all complications. Of course, this does not count the hundreds of thousands to millions of babies whose lives have been unjustly taken through chemical abortion. FDA should therefore reverse its approval of chemical abortion drugs because the politicized approval process was illegal from the start. The FDA failed to abide by its legal obligations to protect the health, safety, and welfare of girls and women. It never studied the safety of the drugs under the label conditions of use, ignored the potential impacts of the hormone blocking regimen on the developing bodies of the adolescent girls, disregarded the substantial evidence that chemical abortion drugs cause more complications than surgical abortions, and eliminated necessary safeguards for pregnant girls and women who undergo this dangerous drug regimen. Furthermore, at no point in the past 2 decades has the FDA ever acknowledged or addressed federal laws that prohibit the distribution of abortion drugs by postal mail. To the contrary, the FDA has permitted and actively encouraged such activity. Now that the Supreme Court has acknowledged that the Constitution contains no right to an abortion, the FDA is ethically and legally obliged to revisit and withdraw its initial approval, which was premised on pregnancy being an illness and abortion being therapeutically effective at treating this illness. The FDA is statutorily charged with guaranteeing the safety and efficacy of drugs and therefore should withdraw this drug that is proven to be dangerous to women and by definition fatally unsafe for unborn children. As an interim step, the FDA should immediately restore the REMS by removing the in person dispensing requirement to eliminate dangerous teleabortion and abortion by mail distribution. Mail order abortions. Allowing mail order abortions is a gift to the abortion industry that allows it to expand far beyond brick and mortar clinics and into pro life states that are trying to protect women, girls, and unborn children from abortion. The FDA should therefore reinstate earlier safety protocols for MIFRETs that were mostly eliminated in 2016 and apply these protocols to any generic version of MIFE a bare minimum policy of limiting abortion pills to the pre 2016 policy of 49 days gestation, returning to the pre 2021 in person dispensing requirement, and returning to requiring prescribers to report all serious adverse events, not just deaths, to the drug sponsor would increase women's health and safety. Address weakness in the current FAER's FDA Adverse Events Reporting System. The administration and policymakers should ensure that healthcare workers, particularly those in hospitals and in emergency rooms, report abortion pill complications. Women who experience complications from abortion pills typically go to an emergency room, not to the abortion pill prescriber. So, putting the onus of reporting on the prescriber, who typically has no idea that a complication has occurred, means that the FAERS is seriously undercounting adverse events. Submitting an adverse event to the database should be quick and efficient process for busy healthcare practitioners. Currently, providers report that the process is difficult and convoluted. Implement a policy of transparency about inspections of the abortion pill sponsors Danco and Gen BioPro, as well as facilities that manufacture the pills. The FDA should respond to congressional requests and Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) requests about inspections, compliance, and post-marketing safety in a timely manner. Stop promoting or approving mail order abortions in violation of long-standing federal laws that prohibit the mailing interstate carriage of abortion drugs. Vaccine importation. Thousands of Americans of faith and conscience wish to receive various childhood vaccinations for themselves and their families, but are not allowed to receive vaccines that are derived through or tested on aborted fetal cells. For example, the chickenpox, hepatitis, and MMR vaccines in the US are all linked to abortion in this way. There are ethically derived alternatives abroad that have been used safely there for decades, but the FDA makes it seemingly difficult for Americans to import them. In January of 2021, the HHS Office for Civil Rights, OCR, and the FDA jointly announced that HHS was required by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, FRA, to allow bulk importation by doctors of certain Japanese made vaccines to accommodate religious needs of patients, but the Biden FDA unlawfully revoked this waiver. The FDA should restore the waiver to comply with RFRA and for the obvious public health benefits of increased childhood vaccination by families seeking ethically derived alternatives. To avoid future moral coercion of the sort experienced with the COVID-19 vaccines, the The FDA and NIH should require the development of drugs and biologics that are free from moral taint and switch to cell lines that are not derived from aborted fetal cell lines or aborted baby blood parts. Conflicts of interest. A 2018 report in Science found that more than two-thirds of FDA reviewers later ended up at the same companies whose products they had been reviewing while they were working for the government. This revolving door is one mechanism by which pharmaceutical companies capture the agencies that regulate them. The FDA should impose a lengthy cooling off period for reviewers, preventing them from working for companies they regulated. In 1997, the FDA relaxed regulations to permit broadcast drug advertisements, after which Big Pharma began routine direct to consumer advertising, making the United States and New Zealand the only countries where such practices are legal. Following the 1997 changes, pharma became the largest advertiser, largest advertiser all for all major media organizations. Jesus. This buys considerable influence in the newsroom, whether media companies acknowledge this or not, and distorts independent reporting on public health issues. The FDA or Congress should regulate where and how paid advertising is used by pharmaceutical companies more stringently, especially on media outlets. National Institutes of Health, NIH. The National Institutes of Health, NIH, is the world's largest biomedical research agency and is made up of 27 different components called institutes and centers. Despite its popular image as benign science agency, NIH was responsible for paying for research in aborted baby body parts, human animal chimera experiments, and gain of function viral research that may have been responsible for COVID 19. Bioethics reform. Research using fetal tissue obtained from elective abortions is immoral and obsolete. Research using human embryonic cells also involves the destruction of human life and should not be subsidized with taxpayer dollars. Good science and life affirming ethical research are not mutually exclusive. In fact, ethically derived sources such as discarded surgical tissue and adult stem cells made pluripotent, not tissue, obtained from elective abortions have contributed the most successful treatments for a variety of ailments. Congress authorized HHS to choose not to fund extramural abortion derived fetal tissue research that fails ethics advisory board review. And in 2019, the Trump administration's HHS chose that course. Subsequently, however, the Biden administration restored unrestricted funding of abortion derived fetal tissue research. HHS should promptly restore the Ethics Advisory Committee to oversee abortion derived fetal tissue research, and Congress should prohibit such research altogether. In intramural research projects, using tissue from aborted children using within the NIH, which should end its human embryonic stem cell registry, aggressively implement a plan to pursue and fund ethical alternative methods of research in order to ensure that abortion and embryo destructive related research, cell lines, and other testing methods become fully obsolete and ethically unthinkable. In addition, the administration should reconvene a new National Council on Bioethics, NCB, to discuss new and emerging areas of ethical concern, to assess whether the ends justify the means when it comes to the promise of therapies and cures, and to establish what limiting principles should guide research and health policy. Because the male female dyad is essential to human nature, and because every child has a right to a mother and a father, three parent embryo creation. Three parent embryo creation and human cloning research should be banned. A new NCB should convene leading experts to examine these issues and provide policy recommendations for the new frontier of bioethical questions that our country will have to address in the coming years. Finally, HHS should create and promote a research agenda that promotes pro life policies and explores the harms, both mental and physical, that abortion has wrought on women and girls. Conflicts of interest. NIH it maintains inappropriate industry ties that create serious conflicts of interest. In 2018 was revealed that $100 million NIH study on the benefits of moderate drinking was funded by the beer and liquor industry. More recently, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID, Anthony Fauci's division of the NIH owns half of the patient of the for the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, among thousands of other pharma patents. Rather than providing grants to university based investigators to run the clinical trials on their own Moderna vaccine, the NIH conducted this research internally, a clear conflict of interest. The NIAID will earn millions from this vaccine's revenue, with several NIH employees and their heirs personally receiving up to $150,000 annually from Moderna vaccine sales. In May 2022, documents obtained pursuant to a FOIA request revealed that NIH Director Francis Collins, NIAID Director Anthony Fauci, and Fauci's Deputy Director Clifford Lane all received royalties from pharmaceutical companies between 2009 and 2014. Nonprofit watchdog Open the Books estimates that from 2010 to 2020, third parties paid more than $350 million in royalties to NIH and its scientists, who are credited as co inventors. Most problematically, in the years when they received payments, Collins, Fauci, and Lane were NIH administrators, not researchers, with no plausible claim to be scientific co discoverers. Most of the world's often Most of the world's other advanced science countries have stricter prohibitions on such conflicts, which helps to explain why the most significant studies on COVID treatments, on natural immunity, and on vaccine efficacy have come mostly from outside the US. Funding for scientific research should not be controlled by a small group of highly paid and unaccountable insiders at the NIH, many of whom stay in power for decades. The NIH monopoly on directing research should be broken. Term limits should be imposed on top career leaders at the NIH, and Congress should consider block granting NIH's grant budget to states to fund their own scientific research. Nothing in the system would prevent several states from partnering to co fund large research projects that require greater resources or impact larger regions. Likewise, the establishment of funding for scientific research at the state level does not preclude more modest federal funding through the National Institutes of Health. The two models are not mutually exclusive. The CDC and NIH Foundation, whose boards are populated with pharmaceutical company executives, need to be decommissioned. Private donations to these foundations, a majority of them from pharmaceutical companies, should not be permitted to influence government decisions about research funding or public health policies. Woke policies. Under Francis Collins, NIH became so focused on the hashtag #MeToo movement that it refused to sponsor scientific conferences unless there were a certain number of women panelists, which violates federal civil rights law against sex discrimination. This quota practice should be ended, and the NIH Office of Equity, Diversion, and Inclusion, which pushes such unlawful action, should be abolished. NIH has been at the forefront in pushing junk gender science. Instead, it should fund studies into the short-term and long-term negative effects of cross-sex interventions, including affirmation, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries, and the likelihood of desistance of if young people are given counseling that does not include medical or social interventions. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, with the goal of being a societal safety net, Medicare and Medicaid touch more American lives than does any other federal program. While they help many, they operate as runaway entitlements that stifle medical innovation, encourage fraud, and impede cost containment. In addition to which their fiscal future is in peril. Both programs should be managed so that the individuals enrolled are empowered to make decisions for themselves and have quality options with affordable prices driven by competition and innovation. Providers who participate should retain or have restored the freedom to practice medicine and take care of their patients according to their patients' unique needs. Medicare. Medicare should be reformed according to four goals and principles. Number one, increase Medicare beneficiaries and control of their health care. Patients are best positioned to determine the value of healthcare services working with their healthcare providers. They also benefit from increased choice of doctors, hospitals, and insurance plans. Access to reliable information with respect to physicians, hospitals, and insurers is therefore essential. Reduce regulatory burdens on doctors. Doctors must be free to focus on treating patients first, not entering codes on computers, and should not be tempted to change their medical judgment based on arbitrary or illogical reimbursement incentives. Ensure sustainability and value for beneficiaries and taxpayers. Prices are best for patients when determined by economic value rather than political power and when they are known in advance of the receipt of services. Government's use of non market based methods to determine reimbursement leads to overspending on low value services and products and underpayment for high value services and products, stifle beneficial innovation, and because of Medicare's size distorts payments throughout the healthcare system. Intermediate entities that can manage financial risk and ensure quality of care are important in transitioning to value based care within the Medicare program. Reduce waste, fraud, and abuse, including through the use of artificial intelligence for their detection. Regulatory reforms. Medicare regulations restrict choice of coverage and care. The Nets administration should reintroduce and restore regulations and demonstrations from the Trump administration that were withdrawn, weakened, or never finalized by the Biden administration, including the Medicare coverage of innovative technologies MCIT rule, the risk adjustment data validation rule RADV, the Medicare Advantage Qualifying Payment Arrangement Incentive Demonstration, MAQI, and and the Global and Professional Direct Contracting, GPDC, rebranded as the Accountable Care Organization Realizing Equity, Access, and Community Health, or ACO REACH model. Additionally, regulations should advance site neutrality by eliminating the inpatient only list and expanding the ambulatory surgical center cover procedures list. Medicare generally pays for inpatient hospital procedures and less for the same procedures performed in an outpatient setting. Whether a medical service is delivered in a physician's office, a clinic, or a hospital setting, the Medicare payment for that service should be the same. CMS should expand the application of site neutral payment options to more settings. Such a policy would level the playing field among providers and remove the financial disabilities for medical professionals who would compete with hospital systems. Finally, HHS needs to restore and enhance conscientious protection regulations that allow medical practitioners to participate in federal healthcare programs without being compelled to provide sex changes or similar services. Legislative proposals remove restrictions on physician owned hospitals. The Affordable Care Act, ACA, imposed restrictions prohibiting Medicare from reimbursing physician-owned and medical hospital and specialty hospitals. The current restrictions do little more than serve the special interest of large hospital systems and undercut consumer choice of high-quality specialty care. These restrictions should be removed so that the physician-owned hospitals can compete with other hospitals in serving Medicare patients. Encourage more competition between Medicare Advantage and private plans. Medicare Advantage MA, a system of competing private health plans, is the major alternative to traditional Medicare for America's large and growing cohorts of seniors. The program provides beneficiaries with a wide range of competitive health plan choices, a richer set of benefits than traditional Medicare provides, and at a reasonable cost. Equally as important, the MA program has been registering consistently high marks for superior performance in delivering high quality care. Critical reforms are still needed to strengthen and improve the program for the future. Specifically, number one, make Medicare Advantage the default enrollment option. Number two, give beneficiaries direct control of how they spend Medicare dollars. Number three, remove burdensome policies that micromanage MA plans. Number four, replace the complex formula based payment model with a competitive bidding model. Number five, reconfigure the current risk adjustment model. Number six, remove restrictions on key benefits and services, including those related to prescription drugs, hospice care, and medical savings accounts plans. Legacy Medicare, Legacy Medicare reform. Legislation reforming legacy non-MA Medicare should base payments on the health status of the patient or intensity of the service rather than whether the patient happens to receive that service. Replace the bureaucrat driven fee for service system with value based systems to empower patients to find the care that best serves their needs. Codify price transparency regulations. Restructure 340B drug subsidies toward beneficiaries rather than hospitals. Repeal health policies enacted under the Obama and Biden administrations, such as the Medicare Shared Savings Program and Inflation Reduction Act. Medicare Part D reform. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, created a drug price negotiation program in Medicare that replaced the existing private sector negotiations in Part D with government price controls for prescription drugs. These government controls will limit access to medications and reduce patient access to new medication. This negotiation program should be repealed and reform in Part D that will have meaningful impact for seniors should be pursued. Other reforms should include eliminating the coverage gap in Part D, reducing the government share in the catastrophic tier, and requiring manufacturers to bear a larger share. Until the IRA is repealed, administration that is required to implement it must do so in a way that is prudent with its authority, minimizing the harmful effects of the law's policies and avoiding even worse unintended consequences. Medicaid. Over the past 45 years, Medicaid and the health safety net have evolved into a cumbersome, complicated, and unaffordable burden on nearly every state. The program is failing some of the most vulnerable patients, is a prime target for waste, fraud, and abuse, and is consuming most of state and federal budgets. The dramatic increase in Medicaid expenditures is due in large part to the ACA, Obamacare, which mandates that states must expand their Medicaid eligibility standards to include all individuals at or below 138% of the federal poverty level, FPL, and the public health emergency, which has prohibited states from performing basic eligibility reviews. The overlap of available benefits among the various health agencies has led to a complex, confusing system that is nearly impossible to navigate, even for recipients. Recipients are often faced with a welfare cliff of benefit losses as they earn above a certain amount, which is contrary to the fundamental purpose of empowering individuals to achieve economic independence. Benefits increasingly involve non medical services such as air conditioning and housing, many of which are already handled by departments other than HHS. Improper payments within Medicaid are higher than those of any other federal program. These payments are evidence of the inappropriateness of Medicaid's expansion, which stemming largely from public health administration, from stemming from public health emergency maintenance of efforts, MOE requirements, and the Affordable Care Act has crowded out of the primary targets of these programs, those who are in most of need. Those true healthcare reform cannot be accomplished in a bureaucratic silo or only through Medicaid and health safety net programs. Reform of the tax code is also essential to genuine, effective reform of our healthcare system. All components of the healthcare system should be part of the reform efforts, and it is imperative that the system be modified to assist states with their current programs. Therefore, the next administration should reform financing, allow states to have a more feasible, to have more flexible, accountable, predictable, transparent, and efficient financing mechanism to deliver medical services. This system should include a more balanced or blended match rate, block grants, aggregate caps, or per capita caps. Any financial system should be designed to encourage and incentivize innovation and the efficient delivery of healthcare services. Federal and state financial participation in the Medicaid program should be rational, predictable, and reasonable. It should also incentivize states to save money and improve the quality of healthcare. Direct dollars to direct dollars to beneficiaries more effectively and responsibly. The current funding structure for the Medicaid program rewards expansions, lacks transparency, and promotes financing gimmicks. CMS should end state financing loopholes, reform payments to hospitals for uncompensated care, replace the enhanced match rate with a fairer and more rational match rate, restructure basic financing, and put the program on a more fiscally predictable budget, which should include reform of disproportionate share hospital payments to hospitals, strengthen program integrity, make program integrity a top priority and the responsibility of the states to protect the taxpayers' investment. And number one, incentivize states. An enhanced contingency fee should be paid to states that successfully increase their efforts to decrease waste, fraud, and abuse. The current system's IT development 90-10 matching rate should be allowed for improvements in states' current fraud and abuse and eligibility systems. Innovative programs that show a positive return on investment for both the state and federal governments should be allowed without the onerous waiver process. Number two, improve Medicaid eligibility standards to protect those in need. As Medicaid enrollment continues to climb, it is imperative that there are appropriate and accurate eligibility standards to ensure that the program remains focused on serving those who are in need. To this end, CMS should A, hold states accountable for proper eligibility determinations, B, require more robust eligibility determinations, and C, strengthen asset test determinations within Medicaid. Number three, conduct oversight and reform of managed care. Incentivize personal responsibility. CMS should allow states to ensure that Medicaid recipients have a stake in their personal health care and a say in decisions related to the Medicaid program. Personal responsibility and consumer choice for Medicaid recipients must go together as standard components as of the safety net, especially for able-bodied recipients. Medicaid recipients, like the rest of Americans, should be given both the freedom to choose their health plans and the responsibility to contribute to their healthcare costs at a level that is appropriate to protect the taxpayer. Add work requirements and match Medicaid's benefits to beneficiary needs. Because Medicaid serves a broad and diverse group of individuals, it should be flexible enough to accommodate different designs for different groups. For example, CMS should launch a robust personal option to allow families to use Medicaid dollars to secure coverage outside of the Medicaid program. CMS should also, number one, clarify that states have the ability to adopt work incentives for able bodied individuals, similar to what is required in other welfare programs, and the ability to broaden the application of targeted premiums and cost sharing to higher income enrollees. Number two, add targeted time limits or lifetime caps on benefits to disincentivize permanent dependence. Allow private health insurance. Congress should allow states the option of contributing to a private insurance benefit for all members of the family in a flexible account that rewards healthy behaviors. This reform should also allow catastrophic coverage combined with an account similar to a health savings account for the direct purchase of health care and payment of cost sharing for most of the population. Increased flexibility benefit redesigns without waivers. CMS should aid flexibility to eliminate obsolete mandatory and optional benefit requirements, and for able bodied recipients, eliminate benefit mandates that exceed those in the private market. This should include flexibility to redesign eligibility, financing, and service delivery of long term care to serve the most vulnerable and truly needy and eliminate middle income to upper income Medicaid recipients. Eliminate current waiver and state plan processes. CMS should allow providers to make payment reforms without cumbersome waivers or state plan amendment processes where possible. More broadly, the federal government's role should be oversight on broad indicators like cost effectiveness and health measures like quality health improvement and wellness, and should give the balance of responsibility for Medicaid program management to states. This reform would include adding Section 1115 waiver requirements in some cases, such as imposing work requirements for able bodied adults, while rescinding requirements in others, such as non healthcare benefits and services related to climate change. Affordable Care Act and private health insurance. Remove barriers to direct primary care. Direct primary care, DPC, is an innovative healthcare delivery model in which doctors contract directly with patients for their care on a subscription basis, regardless of how or where that care is provided. The DPC model is improving patient access, driving higher quality and lower costs, and strengthening the doctor patient relationship. DPC has faced many challenges from government policymakers, including overly exuberant attempts at regulation and misclassification. Changes should clarify that DPC's fixed fee for care does not constitute insurance in the context of health savings accounts. Revisit the No Surprises Act on surprise medical billing. The No Surprises Act protected consumers against balanced bills, but it also established a deeply flawed system for resolving payment disputes between insurers and providers. This government mandated dispute resolution process has sown confusion among arbiters and regulators as judges have sought to ascertain its meaning. The No Surprises Act should scrap the dispute resolution process in favor of a truth in advertising approach that will protect consumers and free doctors, insurers, and arbitrators from confused and conflicting standards for resolving disputes that the disputing parties can best resolve themselves. Facilitate the development of shared savings and reference pricing plan options. Under traditional insurance, patients who choose lower cost care do not benefit financially from that choice. Barriers to reward patients for cost saving decisions should be removed. CMS should ensure that shared savings and reference pricing models that reward consumers are permitted. Separate the subsidized ACA exchange market from the non subsidized insurance market. The Affordable Care Act has made insurance more expensive and less competitive. and the ACA subsidy schemes simply mask these impacts. To make health insurance coverage more affordable for those who are without government subsidies, CMS should develop a plan to separate the non-subsidized insurance market from the subsidized market, giving the non-subsidized market regulatory relief from the costly ACA regulatory mandates. Strengthen hospital price transparency. In 2020, CMS completed its rule to require hospitals to post the prices of common hospital procedures. Future updates of these rules should focus on including quality measures. Combined with the shared savings model and other consumer tools, these efforts could deliver considerable savings for consumers. Center for Consumer Information Oversight and Insurance Oversight, CCHO. CMS also plays an outsized role in overseeing the Obamacare exchanges, including managing healthcare.gov through the Center for Consumer Information and Information Oversight, CCIIO. While Obamacare limits plan options, CCIIO has been overly prescriptive in dictating what benefits and types of health plans may participate in the exchanges, thereby actually stifling market innovation and driving up costs. Congress should build on the Trump administration's efforts to expand choices for small businesses and workers, both in and out of the exchanges, by codifying an expansion of association health plans, short term health plans, and health reimbursement arrangements, including individual coverage HRAs. CCIO should also work with the Treasury Department and the Office of Management and Budget OMB to give consumers more flexibilities with their healthcare dollars through expanded access to health savings accounts. Emergency preparedness. Expand the scope of practice of low complexity and moderate complexity clinical laboratories. During the COVID-19 pandemic, allowing laboratories greater regulatory flexibility regarding CLIA requirements increased access to testing. However, the need for regulatory flexibility is not limited to emergency situations. Ongoing innovations in medical care will continue to drive demand for clinical testing and new tests. One way that increasing demand for other medical service has been accommodated is by revising restrictions on scope of practice to enable providers to practice at the so-called top of their license. CMS should similarly revise CLIA rules regarding scope of practice for clinical laboratories and testing personnel. Create CLIA certification equivalent pathways for non clinical laboratories and researchers. The COVID 19 pandemic revealed that the U.S. needs to leverage the expertise of non clinical laboratories and researchers in order to bolster clinical testing capacity. To accomplish this, CMS should create pathways for granting non clinical laboratories and their testing personnel CLI and their testing personnel CLIA certification equivalency. Non clinical researchers already demonstrate their technical expertise through online training and certification programs. CMS should build on that existing framework so that those laboratories and personnel can similarly demonstrate their clinical testing capabilities. Life, conscience, and bodily integrity. Prohibit abortion travel funding. Providing funding for abortions increases the number of abortions and violates the conscientious and religious freedom rights of Americans who object to subsidizing the taking of life. The Hyde Amendment has long prohibited the use of HHS funds for elective abortions, but in August 2022, Biden executive order pressed the HHS secretary to use his authority under Section 1115 demonstrations to waive certain provisions of the law in order to use taxpayer funds to achieve the administration's goal of helping women to travel out of state to obtain abortions. Moreover, the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel, DOJ OLC, issued a politicized legal opinion declaring, for the first time in the history of Hyde, that this action did not violate the Hyde Amendment and that Hyde applies only to the performance of the abortion itself in violation of the plainly broad language that Congress used. Two of the first actions of a pro-life administration should be for HHS to withdraw the Medicaid guidance and any Section 1115 waivers issued thereunder, and for DOJ OLC to withdraw and disavow its interpretation of the Hyde Amendment. Prohibit Planned Parenthood from receiving Medicaid funds. During the 2020-2021 reporting period, Planned Parenthood performed more than 383,000 abortions. The national organization reported more than 133 million in excess revenue and more than 2.1 billion dollars in net assets. During the same year, Planned Parenthood's reports that its affiliates received more than $633 million in government funding and more than $579 million in private contributions. Planned Parenthood affiliates face accusations of waste, abuse, and potential fraud with taxpayer dollars, failure to report the sexual abuse of minor girls, and allegations of profiting from the sale of organs from aborted babies. Policymakers should end taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood and all other abortion providers and redirect funding to health centers and provide real healthcare for women. The buffer of federal funding for Planned Parenthood comes through the Medicaid program. HHS should take two actions to limit this funding. Number one, issue guidance of re-emphasizing that states are free to defund Planned Parenthood in their state Medicaid plans. And number two, propose rulemaking to interpret the Medicaid statute to disqualify providers of elective abortion from the Medicaid program. Congress should pass the Protecting Life and Taxpayers Act, which would accomplish the goal of defunding abortion providers such as Planned Parenthood. CMS should resolve pending Section 1115 waivers from Idaho, South Carolina, and Tennessee, which, like Texas in January 2022, are seeking both to prohibit abortion providers from participating in state run Medicaid programs and to work with other states to do the same. Abortion is not healthcare, and states should be free to devise and implement programs that prioritize qualified providers that are not entangled with the abortion industry. Withdraw Medicaid funds for states that require abortion insurance or that discriminate in violation of the Weldon Amendment. The Weldon Amendment declares that no HHS funding may go to a state or local government that discriminates against pro life health entities or insurers. In blatant violation of this law, 7 states require abortion coverage in private health insurance plans, and HHS continues to fund those states. HHS under President Trump disallowed $200 million in Medicaid funding from California because of the state's flouting of the law, but the Biden administration restored it. HHS CMS should withdraw appropriated funding up to and including 10% of Medicaid funds from states that require abortion insurance coverage. DOJ should commit to litigating the defense of those funding decisions promptly to the Supreme Court in order to maximize HHS's ability to withdraw funds from entities that violate the Weldon Amendment. Additionally, California has announced that it will discriminate against pharmacies that do not carry chemical abortion drugs outside of California. California's discrimination takes the form of cutting state contracts with such pharmacies and clearly violates the Weldon Amendment. The violation should likewise face the penalties discussed above. Rewrite the ACA abortion separate payment regulation. I think we're gonna stop. We are going to stop. Yeah. Okie dokie artichokes. I wanted to finish the chapter, but we're not going to finish the chapter tonight. We're going to stop on page 505 I believe that's the page I was on. Let me. Yeah, I wanted to finish, but no, we're not gonna finish that tonight. We're on page. Okay, so we're on page 506 of 922. Rewrite the ACA abortion separate payment regulation. So that's 506 out of 922. And the percentage done is 54.88%. Hey, let's go. So we're over 50% done. Adriane Mays, AI Genius, bringing to you live Project 2025, 54.88% done. So we're ending today on 506 out of 922 so that we can make sure we bookmark it and get started again, grind it out tomorrow, so we're over the hump, over the 50% hump. And so we want to knock it out. We are reading the playbook mandate for leadership, the conservative promise 2025. And thank you so much for joining almost 3 hours here today, this evening, the evening episode, and leave in the comments any random acts of kindness that you can show to help someone to get the education of this mandate. So the great thing is, before, and I'll go ahead and show you at the end. I showed you on ChatGPT what were 10 reasons why everyone trying to build wealth in 2024 should read Project 2025. So what I'm going to type into ChatGPT so we can end on this one is ChatGPT provide 10 ways. We'll do 5 ways just for time. Provide 5 ways can provide random acts of kindness to educate people about the Project 2025 and provide reasons why you should want to read this. And let's see what ChatGPT comes up with before we wrap up here. So I just typed in provide 5 ways you can educate people in random acts of kindness and to provide the why behind it. So let me let you see what I typed. And so that you can see with me what ChatGPT is spitting out. So again, we'll read it out loud here. Let me go back. So what I typed in is provide 5 ways you can provide random acts of kindness to educate people about the Project 2025 and provide reasons why you should want to read this. So for 5 ways to provide random acts of kindness to educate people about Project 2025, number 1, host free community workshops. Description: organize free workshops in community centers, libraries, or local businesses where you present key insights from Project 2025. The reason: workshops provide an interactive platform to educate and engage with people, helping them to understand the importance of future proof strategies for wealth building and leadership. Number 2, create and distribute informative flyers. Design concise and visually appealing flyers that summarize the main points of Project 2025 and distribute them in high traffic areas like coffee shops, gyms, and community bulletin boards. The reason: flyers are an easy way and cost effective way to reach a broad audience, sparking interest and encouraging people to learn more about the project. Number 3, start a social media awareness campaign. Description: use your social media platform to share infographics, short videos, and personal reflections on Project 2025. Encourage your followers to read and share the content. The reason: social media campaigns can reach a large and diverse audience quickly, creating a ripple effect as more people engage with and share your post. Number 4, give copies of Project 2025. Project 2025 is free, so you can get it digitally and you can actually share that information who are interested in leadership and wealth building. So you can just share this the community of cccwecaremi.org or .com, .org. And the reason, it says a personalized gift can make a significant impact, showing recipients that you value their growth and success and providing them with valuable resources. Number 5, volunteer to speak at local events. Description: offer to speak at local schools, business clubs, or community events about the key takeaways from Project 2025 and how they can apply to personal and professional growth. Reason: speaking engagements allow for direct interaction and the opportunity to inspire and motivate others through your enthusiasm and knowledge. Ha! Reasons why you should want to read the Project 2025. Number one, stay ahead of economic trends, gain valuable insights into future economic trends and how to navigate them successfully, ensuring your wealth building strategies remain relevant and effective. Number two, enhance leadership skills. Learn about modern leadership principles and practices that can improve your ability to lead in both personal and professional settings. Number three, prepare for your policy changes. Understanding upcoming policies and regulations that could impact your financial plans, allowing you to stay informed and make proactive decisions. Number four, for foster innovation. Discover innovative approaches and technological advancements that can be integrated into your wealth building strategies, keeping you competitive and forward thinking. And number five, promote sustainable growth. Ensure sustainable and ethical business practices that can attract investors and customers, contributing to a long term success and positive impact on society. So, speaking with Enika Gaines earlier today and Adrienne Mays with CCC Because We Care Foundation, so celebrating 15 years in the community, September 11th, 2029. So this random act of kindness bringing to you live the reading of Project 2025. So we're going to pick it up tomorrow. I'm not sure if we're going to do the morning session, but we will get it done tomorrow. So we're on again, page 506 out of 922. And we will pick it back up to tomorrow and we see together. Thank you so much for joining thus far, getting it done. And the key thing is, one thing I want to point out to you, you see how long it's taken me to actually read this. And I'm reading through straight, give or take maybe 10, 15 minutes, throughout this whole time frame. So again, you have to put the time into your education. If you want to become a billionaire, if you want to reach the most elite status of your planning. So if you even financially, the billionaire mindset starts mentally. But if you don't know the tools that are out here, for example, this Project 2025, seeing how to build financial education, wealth creation, travel experiences, health and wellness, and artificial intelligence education booming in a 2024 and into a new world. So it's great that I'm the AI genius. It's great that we have AI automation. We have all these tools and we have processes and we have go high level and systems and marketing software. But the key thing is when you're putting everything together and you're looking at random acts of kindness, when you're looking at business owners, corporations, people in general, you want to have like minds working with you. And random acts of kindness is something that is passionate about CCC Because We Care Foundation. It's a platform that Enika Gaines and Adrienne Mays are our foundation of growth. So the business owners and growth plan and the building the family office or building the different opportunities for expansion, we want to do it with like minds that are forward thinking, that want to help other people, that want to serve. We're all here for a reason. It's an advantage and it's an honor that I'm able to help and serve you and bring you 7 parts or 11 parts, excuse me, thus far, just of the ability to read this document. Thank you so much for the support, the comments. I was even called the GOAT, the greatest of all time earlier. But you know what's so funny? Like you take it for granted the small things like reading. But even looking at this document, and I'm going to try to refrain from comments until I finish it. So we have less than 400 pages. About 400 pages to go because again, we're on page 506. So about 416 pages to go. We're going to knock that out sooner than later. But right now, we're going to prepare to get the week started. So thank you so much again for tuning in for at Adriane Mays. Don't forget to leave in the comments your random act of kindness. How are you going to educate people about this Project 2025? If you like it, if you don't like it, I mean, we can talk about that once we finish. But the first thing is, how are we going to give people the knowledge to make the decision one way or the other? How are you going to share this with someone? Talk to me in the comments. I can, I will, I must. Adriane Mays, president of CCC Because We Care Foundation, bringing you love on the end of this Independence Day, starting a new start, July 7th, 2024, day 62 in the billionaire journey. I can, I will, I must. Good night. Let's go. Detroit, one product, educate. What up, dope? Okay, now good night.